Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep these long stories coming. Also, for even more police horror stories, check out my new channel. The link's in the description and pinned comment. I'd love it if you stop by and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are and which city are you listening from tonight? Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I remember feeling like every breath I took in that creepy taxi was a countdown. The dispatcher's last words came through my old radio in a muffled voice. No signal here, just static after you cross the county line. I had passed the last streetlight. The headlights barely illuminated the shadows of the trees through the darkness. My name is Carter Hayes, and I've been working these roads for about 15 years, but I've never experienced such silence in my life. I got the call just past midnight. Missing person, late report, worried sister out of Kerrville. Standard run. County Road 142, 5 miles north. The address was scraggly, scrawled on a napkin, handed by the dispatcher through a headset. On foot search. No sign of foul play so far. Right. I knew from experience that no sign often meant we haven't looked hard enough. I switched to channel 4 and pinged my unit light. No answer. Static hissed back. I tucked my radio under my vest, thumb brushing the emergency button on my Remington 870 strapped low on my hip. Trained reflex, habit. At the FM 351 turnoff, I parked my cruiser on the shoulder, engine idling. I grabbed my flashlight, Milwaukee, high lumen, and clicked it on. The beam cut a harsh line ahead, dancing across barren fields. I stepped out and felt the air press against my chest, scented with creosote and dry grass. The wind shook the cab's door, rattling the thin glass. My boots crunched on gravel. I paused, hand on the holster, listening. Nothing but my heartbeat, too loud in my ears. I scanned the horizon. No sign of tire tracks, not even boot prints. I radioed dispatch again. Maybe this time I'd get through. Dispatch, this is 27, beginning on foot grid along the creek bed east of the access road. Silence. I cursed under my breath. My partner was off duty tonight, out with family. This run was mine alone. I slung the shotgun's barrel over my shoulder and stepped into the brush. The flashlight's glare revealed twisted mesquite trunks, their branches clawing at the sky, a low rustle like distant breath. I knelt at the edge of a shallow wash, tracing faint footprints half filled with dusty soil. They led deeper into the thicket, away from the road. I took a deep breath and followed, careful to keep my steps slow, ears straining for any sound. Snapping twig, distant shout, animal cry. Half a mile in, the path curved alongside a dry creek bed. My light caught a bicycle wheel lying on its side, spokes bent. A quick sweep showed a red helmet cracked in two, its foam lining torn. My stomach clenched. Whoever had been here was in trouble. I crouched and examined the rim. Streaks of dried blood, dark rust on the metal. I snapped a photo with my phone, evidence, then pressed forward, heart pounding. The trees thinned into a small grove, clearing into a dirt lot scattered with old hunting blinds and rusted equipment. A lone cabin stood at the far edge. Wood slats warped by weather, windows shattered. Moonlight slivered through the broken panes, casting thin beams across the floor. I felt the hairs on my neck prickle. I clicked off my flashlight and let my eyes adjust. In the darkness, I sensed movement, slow, deliberate. A faint sob. My hand tightened on my flashlight. I flicked it back on. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and old blood. My beam landed on empty bottles, an overturned chair, and finally her. She crouched in the corner, knees to chest, arms wrapped tight, pale face streaked with tears and mud. I knelt beside her, voice low but firm. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Hayes with Texas County. You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" She looked up, eyes wide. "Emma Clark." Her voice trembled like dry leaves. My brother. We were hiking, and he said he'd check the mapped trail marker. Then I heard him yell, but when I ran over, the bike was gone. Then I heard footsteps. I reached for my radio again, static still. I radioed on the emergency channel, prayer more than protocol. "Mayday, mayday if anyone hears. Need backup, medevac for one female. Possible concussion. Male, adult missing. Over." Nothing. Only the wind rattling the cabin's roof. I swallowed, forcing calm. "Emma, can you stand? Let's get you out of here." She nodded, gripping my forearm. I guided her outside into the cold night. Heat rose from my vest as adrenaline spiked. I searched her for injuries, scrapes on her arms, dirt caked under her nails. I radioed again, voice tight. "Dispatch, this is 27. Request air unit. I have one subject, non-ambulatory. I'm 2 clicks north of FM 3351. I waited. Still nothing. Above us, the moon broke through clouds, illuminating the grove in silver. Emma shivered. I offered her my jacket. She pulled it tight, but her eyes stayed fixed on the cabin door. "He was here," she whispered. I saw footprints, fresh, big boots, and someone watching me. She pulled her knees up again. The wind scattered the dry leaves at our feet like whispered warnings. I scanned the tree line. Branches swayed, but no shapes moved. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a missing person call. It was something predatory. Someone who didn't want us here. I hoisted Emma's pack over my shoulder. First aid kit, water, radio battery pack. I locked the cabin door behind me, sliding the beam of my light along the walls. No one hiding. I led Emma back toward the creek bed, boots slapping the dirt. I listened for any sound behind us. Branch snapping, whisper of cloth. Nothing. And then a soft cry. Emma rose. I spun, flashlight slicing the dark. The beam caught footprints in the creek bed. Empty shoe prints, one set, huge. They stopped a few feet away, as if whoever made them had vanished. My heart hammered. I called out, voice low, "Who's there? Show yourself." No answer. The wind shifted. I smelled wood smoke and something else, faint, coppery, blood. I knelt to examine the prints. Long, deep impressions. Not a hiker, something heavier. I stood and scanned the tree line. No eyes, no silhouettes. Only the wind tearing at mesquite leaves. Emma whimpered. I pulled her closer. "We're almost at the road. Stay close." My radio crackled. Static and then a faint voice. 27, do you copy?" My chest loosened. I touched the device. "Dispatch, I'm with the victim. Need evac now." "Air support en route," the dispatcher said. Relief surged through me, but I didn't let it show. I guided Emma down the wash, thinking of her brother. If he was out here, I needed to find him before dark turned deeper. Before whatever left those prints came back. We reached the edge of the trees where my cruiser's lights were like beacons. I laid Emma gently on the tailgate, checked her vitals. Steady, though pale. Medics would be here soon. I turned back to the cabin, holstered my shotgun, and clicked off my light. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped toward the darkness, knowing that finding one terrified sister was just the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't ignore. I nodded at the medics as they lifted Emma onto the stretcher. Her eyes glazed but steady now that professionals tended her wounds. I watched them load her into the back of the ambulance, its lights pulsing through the gathering darkness. For a moment, the world felt unbearably quiet. Too quiet after the cacophony of adrenaline. I clipped my radio back to my vest and slipped my hand into my coat pocket, brushing its worn leather against the cold metal of my badge. Every instinct screamed that I shouldn't leave this place yet. I turned from the ambulance, boots crunching over scattered leaves, and headed back toward the cabin. The yellow beam of my flashlight traced the same path we'd come, illuminating disturbed soil and broken brush. I followed the footprints again, the great, heavy prints that ended at the creek's edge and seemed to vanish into thin air. I crouched to examine the spot. Loose stones, a small dip in the earth, and nothing more. No signs of dragging, no shards of broken glass, no trail at all. It was as though whoever, or whatever, had stepped there simply unfurled into the darkness. I exhaled slowly, brushing a stray branch from my face. My mind raced through possibilities. A local hunter, a prankster, someone with ill intent who'd taken Emma's brother deeper into the woods. But those prints, they were too large for a grown man wearing standard boots. The tread pattern was unfamiliar, like nothing in the police inventory. I clicked my tongue against the roof of my mouth, a nervous habit, and rose to my full height. I swept my light across the tree line. No movement, only the moonlight, pale and cold, casting long skeletal shadows across the ground. My hand tensed on the grip of my shotgun. I set the beam low and moved along the creek bank, hugging the trees where I could, scanning every knot and gnarled root. I was halfway to the old tractor tire when I heard it, a soft whimper, barely audible. I froze, thumb hovering over the safety. I clicked off my radio, shutting out the static echoing in my ear. The sound came again, a low, broken cry from upstream. Not Emma. She'd lost consciousness soon after we'd found her. This was fresh. I whispered, "Easy now," and crept forward. The underbrush was thick here, the air heavy with humidity that smelled of wet earth and rotting leaves. My boots relished the soft give beneath my feet. The victim's sobs grew louder as I neared a downward slope, the creek carving a narrow gully beneath a canopy of oak limbs. I slid down the incline on one knee, flashlight trained on the muddy bank. There, crouched against a fallen log, was the missing man, barely older than a teenager, shirt torn, face bruised. His eyes widened when he saw me, relief and terror mingled in their dark depths. "Deputy Hayes," I said, voice low, "I've got you now, you're safe." He flinched at the sound of my voice, twisting away as though my words might burn him. I dropped to one knee and set the flashlight on the ground, shining upward to my face. "It's okay," I said, raising a hand. "I'm here to help." He exhaled so forcefully I saw the air ripple. They were right behind me," he whispered, voice cracking. "I ran. I lost the trail. Then I heard them whispering, like 100 voices." I kept my tone calm. "How long have you been here?" He closed his eyes and winced. "Hours. I thought you'd never find me." A distant rumble of helicopter blades reached my ears, air support. I smiled, relief warming my chest. I radioed, voice steady. "Dispatch, this is 27, victim located. I have male adult, conscious but disoriented. Southwest of cabin, by the creek. ETA chopper?" 2 minutes, came the reply. I straightened, offering a hand. He grasped it like a lifeline. I helped him to his feet, his legs buckled. I caught him around the waist and half carried him to the creek bank. The chopper's spotlight pierced the treetops, swinging toward us in a great arc. The rotor wash sent leaves and dust swirling. I held him steady as the medics rappelled down and took over, loading him onto a stretcher. One of the flight paramedics, a woman whose name patch read Lopez, met my eye. "Deputy, we've got him. Any others out here?" I shook my head. "Just the two of them, a sister and a brother." She nodded and turned back to her work. The medic checked his vitals and secured him into the stretcher. I motioned Emma's ambulance driver to come closer, planning to radio the family myself once they were both safe. I could already hear the anxious caller's voice in my head, a little girl's shaking tone, asking for her brother. I clenched my jaw against the anger rising in me. Whoever'd done this had terrorized not just these two siblings, but a whole family. When both patients were secured, I watched the medevac take off, its blades rotating so fast they became a blur. The beam receded into the sky until it was just a pinprick of light among the stars. I turned back to the cabin again, heart thudding. The door still hung open, blackness yawning inside. I raised my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned under my weight. Inside, the cabin was colder now that we'd cleared it. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, painting ghostly patterns on the walls. I swept the beam around, overturned furniture, glint of a single boot heel lying in the corner. I frowned, pocketed my light, and drew my service pistol. Urban legend said cabin dwellers would fan the logs to hide fires. This one had no fire, but it had signs of occupation. A half-smoked cigar resting on a rotting table, a tattered photograph pinned to a nail, two boys grinning in matching hiking gear. I picked up the photo, careful not to smudge the edges. The boys looked no older than 10, identical twins maybe, standing in front of a pine forest. Their eyes gleamed with mischief. Someone had scrawled M&M Lost Pines on the back in blue ink. My stomach lurched. Not M for missing, but M&M, initials. The letters scrawled on the tree trunk near the creek earlier. Initials etched deep. I tucked the photo into evidence bag and slammed it shut. Footsteps thumped behind me. I spun, gun raised, beam slicing across the porch. Nothing. The wind had picked up, rattling the cabin's outer walls. I shrugged and turned back to my flashlight, flicking it on. My beam landed on scratches in the floorboards. Drag marks. Fresh. I knelt to examine them. Faint red smudges mixed with splintered wood. Whoever dragged that bed frame, or that carcass, had blood on their boots. My breath caught. A groan drifted from the back room. I sighed and moved forward, holstering my pistol but keeping my hand close. The floor creaked under my weight. The doorway loomed, dark beyond the lantern's reach. I clicked off my light and whispered, "Come on out." Silence. Then a soft groan again, followed by a thud. My heart hammered. I flicked the light back on and swept the beam across the room. In the far corner, behind the broken mattress, I saw him. A man's body slumped against the wall, head tipped to one side, mouth open in a rictus of agony. His legs splayed unnatural angles. His skin was an ashen gray, lips purplish. I knelt, checking for pulse. Nothing. Rigor had already set in. I touched his wrist, cold as the autumn wind. I exhaled, stomach twisting. This wasn't Emma's brother. This was someone else, someone who had died here. Maybe a hiker who'd never made it out. I rifled his pockets for ID. Nothing but a folded bandana, stained dark, and a matchbook from a roadside bar called the Rusty Spur, 90 miles south in Laredo. How had he ended up here? The distance made no sense. I unwrapped the bandana. Initials embroidered in faded gold thread. MJI stood, backing away slowly. My flashlight beam quivered as I raised it to the ceiling, to the rafters where webs clung to rusted nails. Somewhere, high above, something rustled. My breath hitched. I dropped the beam to the floor and slipped a fresh magazine into my pistol. The click echoed. I radioed dispatch. 27 to dispatch. Possible homicide seen inside cabin. Unknown male, deceased. Officer request backup for scene security. Static met my words. I slammed the radio against my palm. I tapped the emergency button twice and held it, hoping to override the dead zone. Nothing but hiss. I cursed, sliding the radio back onto my vest. This entire place seemed to rebel against communication. A sudden crack of wood echoed above me. I froze, gun trained on the ceiling. The old timber settled, or was it movement? I glanced up, saw shadows dance between beams. Something shifted. A plank above creaked, and dust drifted to the floor. My heart pounded in my ears. I called out, voice low but firm. "If there's someone else here, come out with your hands where I can see them." Silence. Then a faint scuff behind me. I pivoted, flashlight carving a swath through the darkness. The porch door slammed shut. I leapt forward, smashing my shoulder against it. It held. I raised my voice. "Come on, show yourself." No reply. My palms sweated on the pistol grip. I backed toward the front window, eyes scanning the glass shards. Outside, I saw nothing but trees. The same trees that hid Emma's brother and marked the path here. I closed my eyes, drawing a deep breath. This was my job. Bring order to chaos, shed light on shadows. But right now, the darkness was too thick. I heard the soft scuffle again, feet on wood coming closer. I tensed, finger on trigger. The scuffle paused, then moved away, toward the back of the cabin. I followed, flashlight beam bouncing over the wall. The back wall was punctured by broken slats, a jagged hole that looked recent, as though someone had forced their way through. I approached the hole and peered out. The trees swayed in the moonlight, branches whispering. Below, the creek gurgled quietly, reflecting the pale sky. I felt eyes on me, watching. I swallowed, heart pounding. Whoever or whatever had chased Emma's brother here wasn't finished, and now they knew I was here, hunting them. I straightened, holstering my pistol and reattaching my shotgun. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam narrow and focused. I dialed the cabin in on my GPS and muttered to myself, "I'm not leaving until I find answers." I stepped out onto the porch, leaving the body behind, cold and empty-eyed, and crossed the threshold. My boots hit the ground with purpose. I moved toward the timbered gap where the world opened to forest and creek. Above me, the night sky spun slowly, indifferent. Below, the ground trembled with secrets waiting to be unearthed. I gripped my shotgun and whispered, "Let's finish this." Then I stepped into the darkness once more, every sense alive, every nerve blazing, chasing shadows through the skeleton of trees, knowing that the truth, when it came, would chill me to the bone. I stepped off the porch into the chill that wrapped the clearing like a funeral shroud. My boots sank into the damp earth, and the weight of the shotgun across my shoulder felt suddenly insufficient against the quiet that swallowed me whole. The ragged hole in the back wall of the cabin yawned behind me, a jagged wound in the wood that hinted at violence yet to be confronted. My flashlight beam carved a slender path through the trees, dancing across trunks streaked with moss and scraped bark. Every branch seemed poised to snap, every rustle a portent of something unseen moving just beyond vision. I paused, pressing my back against a mesquite trunk. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and earth, laced with the tang of abandoned smoke from that half-burned cigar inside. My breath tumbled out in quick puffs as I steadied the light on a fallen log, tracing the deep hoof prints that marked the soft ground. They were too large for a man, too deep to ignore, like an outsized boot or something with weight I couldn't yet comprehend. My blood pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to follow them, stepping carefully over twisted roots and sloping ground slippery with mud. Halfway to the creek, I caught sight of something drooping low across the branches, a length of red fabric, torn and stained. I recognized the color immediately. Emma's jacket. My stomach clenched. I flicked the beam higher and saw the sleeve snagged on a branch, fluttering like a wounded banner. Horror spiked through me. I sprinted forward, scattering leaves, and reached up to untangle it. The fabric came free easily, but when I lifted it, something small fell to the ground. A silver locket, its clasp broken. I dropped to my knees and picked it up. On the front was etched a single initial. E. My heart seized. Emma's. But why would she leave it behind? Fear twisted inside me. I pocketed the locket and swept the beam across the clearing. Aside from the dull trickle of the creek and the faint glow of cabin windows behind me, nothing stirred. My radio crackled faintly in my ear, static carrying a distant snatch of voices. A dispatcher urging calm, paramedics confirming departures. I tapped for clarity but got only white noise. I snapped the radio off and turned my full attention to the path ahead. Whatever had taken Emma's brother, whoever had left those prints, had circled back. And now they'd come for Emma's locket too. The trail led me to the creek's edge, where water whispered over smooth stones. I knelt and pressed my gloved hand into the cool flow, searching the shallows. Beneath a cluster of rocks, I found deeper depressions in the mud, parallel slashes where something heavy had been dragged. I traced the marks downriver, crouching low, flashlight beam kissing each scrape. The path veered around a bend where oaks knotted overhead, their branches tangled like the knuckles of gnarled hands. I followed the line of red mud until it ended abruptly at a shallow pool where the current swirled sluggishly. There, something glinted, a fragment of metal coated in grime. I pried it loose, a broken dog tag, bent and gouged. I raised it to the beam. The inscription was half erased, but I made out C. Clark, Emma's brother Caleb. My pulse thundered. Whoever had sliced this tag had meant to remove identification, but in the mud they'd forgotten this piece. It was proof. A key. I clipped it into my evidence bag and stood, glancing upstream. The trees pressed close, darkness dense beyond the flashlight's reach. Then I heard it. A breath. Quiet before exhale, just behind me. I spun, light skittering across the creek bank, catching the lean form of a deer bounding away into the underbrush. Relief flooded me, but only for a heartbeat. I exhaled, dropping into a crouch and continuing downriver, careful to keep low. I kept my non-shooting hand on the pistol at my hip, ready to draw. The ground sloped upward, and I climbed onto a fallen birch that arched over the water. Its bark was damp and slippery, but I balanced, light angled toward the far bank where the mud showed deeper tracks, crosshatch patterns like tire treads, too narrow for a full-sized vehicle, too wide for a mountain bike, a dirt bike. My breath stuttered. That meant someone had chased Caleb on 2 wheels, through the woods, maybe at high speed. I leapt from the log to the far side, knees buckling, and landed just as the beam caught a glint of chrome in the trees ahead. I ducked behind a stump and raised the light. Half hidden under a pile of pine needles lay a motorcycle mirror, its surface scratched and dull. I picked it up. No tag, obliterated by a blade or stone. Whoever this was, they'd tried to erase every sign they'd been here, except for the enormous prints, the drag marks, the locket, and this mirror. Each piece a breadcrumb on a trail I needed to follow. I pressed on, using the creek as a guide until it bent away toward a thicket of yaupon holly. The ground here was soft, littered with red berries crushed underfoot. The smell was sweet and faintly medicinal. I scraped a handful of berries into my glove and sniffed. Nothing distinctive, but I pocketed a few as a sample. If I could find their origin, I might map a route. I radioed once more, hoping paramedics or other units might be searching nearby. Nothing but hiss. I cursed under my breath, stuffing the radio back into my vest. A rustle to my left made me swing the light. Two shapes shifted against the trees. Branches, then two figures dropping to all fours and scuttling away like wounded animals. I advanced, heartbeat slamming, but as I neared the spot, only brush and leaf litter remained. No footprints this time, no sound. I leaned close, listening. My breath caught as a low growl emanated from deeper in the woods. I straightened, hand on my shotgun, and called, "Caleb, this is Deputy Hayes. If you can hear me, make a noise." Silence. Then, faintly, a sob. My heart exploded. I strode toward the sound, beam locked on a cluster of cedar trees. The sob grew louder, a man's sob, ragged and hoarse, echoing through the hollow. I raced forward, stumbling over roots, and nearly fell at the sight that met me. An old game trail leading into a haze of mist hovering just above the ground. The mist was odd. Too low, too thick to be natural. I knelt at the trail's entrance, shining my light into the swirling air. The vapor looked like smoke, clinging to every branch, trailing after me when I moved. I stood, chest heaving, and called out, "Caleb, where are you?" My voice sounded small in the hush. No answer. The mist shimmered, and for a brief instant I could have sworn I saw a silhouette. A gaunt man, hunched over, standing 10 paces ahead, just beyond reach. But when I blinked, he was gone. I raised my flashlight and swept the area, but the clearing was empty. Only the mist drifted lazily, carrying the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. I stepped into the haze, every nerve alight, each footstep sucking in dew. I followed the trail, wavering, uncertain, until the mist cleared and I found myself at the mouth of a crevice in the hillside. The earth here had collapsed, forming a shallow cave entrance half hidden by ferns. The air emanating from it was warm and damp, heavy with the promise of secrets buried in darkness. My light flickered across the cavern's interior, narrow, winding, walls glistening with moisture. I felt compelled forward, the sobbing now unmistakable, coming from deep within that living tomb. I swallowed, tightened my fingers around the shotgun, and forced my feet into the cave's mouth. The ground sloped downward, the beam bouncing off the slick walls, revealing old graffiti carved into stone. Names, dates, some decades old, alongside fresh marks. CC, July 27th, 25. EC, and one I didn't recognize. MJ, just like the initials on the dog tag. My stomach knotted. This place wasn't just a random hideout, it was a lair, a place of ritual. The sob grew louder. I crept forward, every muscle coiled, until I stepped into a larger chamber illuminated by phosphorescent fungi clinging to the rock. Their pale glow cast long, sickly shadows across the floor, pooling around a figure slumped against the far wall. Caleb. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, eyes squeezed shut. He sagged forward, exhausted. I dropped to my knees beside him. "Caleb, it's me, Deputy Hayes. I'm here. I've got you." He blinked, disoriented, and I rested a hand on his shoulder. His frame was trembling. They took me here, said I'd never leave. I scanned the chamber. To my left, a crude altar had been formed, piled stones stained dark, shards of broken bottles, strips of torn fabric, and scattered animal bones. A heavy iron ring bolted into the wall, rope frayed and dangling. My heart pounded. This was a torture chamber, or worse, a sacrificial pit. I helped Caleb to his feet, supporting him against the wall. He swayed, and I held him tight. I spoke softly. "We're getting out." Hold on. He nodded but winced, pressing a hand to his side where a faint trickle of blood seeped through his shirt. I pressed my jacket over the wound, squeezing to stem the flow. His breath came in ragged gasps. I clicked my radio on one more time. "Dispatch, this is 27. I have subject conscious. Possible internal injuries. I'm escorting him out. Repeat, escorting out west entrance of Creek Cave." My words hung in the stale air. I clipped the radio off again. I surveyed the cave entrance behind us. The path was narrow, dangerous, and likely to collapse under two people. The shriek of wind outside was replaced by a low hum. The chopper returning, searching. I crouched and whispered, "Caleb, I need you to lean on me." "We're almost out." He gripped my arm, face pale but determined. I lifted the shotgun and nudged him forward. As we climbed, the mist inside the cave seemed to swallow us, but I kept the light trained on our feet, marking every step. The sobbing had stopped. The cave was silent now, as if holding its breath. We neared the mouth when a cold wind blasted through, extinguishing my flashlight with a hiss. Darkness swallowed me. I fumbled for my spare flashlight, heart pounding. In that heartbeat of pitch black, I felt a presence, just beyond my skin, a weight pressing in. A breath on the back of my neck. I spun, fumbling to turn on the light. A spark clicked, and the beam flared. I shone it wildly across the entrance, and froze. Standing there, framed in mist and moonlight, was a figure. Tall, shoulders broad, head tilted downward. I recognized the silhouette instantly. The liaison officer from Emma's school. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the emblem on his uniform, FM Police Department. His mouth curved into a slow, deliberate smile. The blood from Caleb's wound blossomed darkly on his shirt. Before I could raise my weapon, he raised a hand, a single finger pointing at Caleb. "You found them." His voice was a hoarse whisper, echoing in the cave mouth. "But I wanted them for my own." He stepped forward, and I heard the boots, heavy, measured. I felt the shotgun tremble in my hands. "Stay back," I snarled, voice raw. He laughed, a sound that cracked like ice. "This place," he said, gesturing at the cave, "has power. I just needed them here to awaken it." He took another step and the mist swirled around him, revealing symbols carved into his skin. Blue, pulsating faintly. "Now, Deputy Hayes, you can watch." My finger tightened on the trigger. Caleb crumpled at my side, blood pooling. The liaison officer raised his other hand, fingers forming strange shapes. I fired. The world exploded into white-hot pain, every nerve ending alive and screaming. My ears rang with 1,000 tiny echoes of that final crack. My vision gone in my left eye as stars shattered across my sight. I hit the ground hard, shotgun clattering, the cave floor trembling beneath me as though the earth itself were convulsing. My head lolled sideways against the damp stone. Somewhere, deep in the darkness, Caleb cried out. A short, ragged sound cut off as another tremor rattled the rocks overhead. I forced my eyes open. The phosphorescent fungus had vanished. The chamber was pitch black, swollen with an oppressive silence that pressed against my eardrums. My ribs burned where they'd taken the blast. Most likely a ricochet or the cave wall itself collapsing around me. I tried to draw breath, but pain froze it in my lungs. I bit back a curse and shook my head, trying to clear the ringing. A faint scrape echoed through the chamber. Stones grinding against stone. I blinked, vision flickering, and saw a sliver of gray light creeping along the far wall. Moonlight, or maybe the chopper's searchlight, sieving in from outside the cave mouth, outlining a narrow beam through the mist. I struggled to haul myself upright, muscles screaming. My hand closed around my pistol. Empty now, the magazine ejected. I cursed again, tasting copper on my tongue. "Caleb?" I croaked. "Caleb?" Silence. The air smelled of dust and blood, thick enough to choke on. Pain radiated from my left side in a hot wave. I pressed a shaking hand to my ribs, felt wetness, slick. I grabbed my flashlight on the ground and snapped it on. The beam wavered as I aimed it at the chamber floor. Debris, splintered rock, a long, jagged crack spreading from where I'd landed. A piece of shotgun stock lay mangled near my boot. I stood, swaying, and pressed the light on Caleb's last known position. The wreckage extended in every direction. No mud tracks, no bloody dog tag, and no sign of him. Only footprints. Mine, deep and uneven, radiating outward from the point of impact. I took a slow step forward. The beam caught something low on the far wall. A smear of dark red, streaked across the rock, dripping down like smeared paint. My breath caught. The smell of iron grew stronger. "Caleb." My voice cracked. I stumbled toward the smear, gripping the cave wall to steady myself. My fingers traced the dark line. Fresh blood, still moist. I followed it down into a shallow pool at the base of the wall where water pooled. Tiny bubbles broke the surface. I knelt, shaking, and dipped a finger into the pool, felt the warmth. Tendrils of panic coiled in my gut. Caleb couldn't have gone far if his blood was here, but how had he been moved? A groan cut across the chamber, low, rattling. I spun, flashlight grazing the entrance. The jagged gap gaped open, and beyond it, I saw the silhouette of someone crouched low, the liaison officer. His uniform was torn, smudged with dirt. He held something pressed against his chest. A slumped form that didn't move. He didn't look up. I swallowed against the scream rising in my throat. "Hayes," he said softly, voice ragged, unfamiliar. "You survived." I clenched my jaw. "Where's Caleb?" My voice sounded brittle in the confined space. He stood, dust falling from his shoulders like rain. Behind him, the moonlight traced his outline as if framing a specter. "He's with her." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder, toward the cave mouth. My elbow burned from a cascade of pain. I forced myself to take 2 steps closer, ignoring the ache. The liaison officer took another step back, dragging whatever he carried toward the cave gap. I aimed the light onto the bundle. It was Emma Clark, eyes closed, pale beneath a film of dust, arms and legs limp. My chest constricted. "What have you done to them?" I hissed. He closed the distance, stopping just inside the mouth. The mist curled around his boots. He set Emma on the ledge where the cave opened to the night. "I promised them power," he said, voice almost gentle. Power beyond their understanding. But they were too afraid. They ran. My head swam. Emma's brother. Emma. Both lured here, broken, fractured. "Let them go," I rasped. "I've called for backup." He snorted. "Call until your radio bursts into flames." He waved at my limp radio clipped to my vest. No signal. "You thought you could save them, but this place..." He ran a finger along the rim of the opening, where the mist curled inward. "This place is ancient. It hungers. It needs offerings." I lurched forward, spite overcoming pain. "You'll answer for this." He met my glare, expression inscrutable. Moonlight glimmered on the symbols carved into his skin, blue lines winding over his arms, crawling onto his neck. They pulsed faintly, almost alive. The air thrummed around him. I felt the ground vibrate. "I am its servant," he said, voice low, "and now you will become one too." He squeezed Emma's shoulder and she shuddered. Caleb's name echoed in my mind. I lunged, but my boot slipped on the slick rock. I crashed to my side, the flashlight beam cartwheeling. He seized the moment, lifted a hand, and a shockwave slammed through me. My ears rang, vision blurred. Pain radiated across my chest as I was thrown backward, my back hitting the stone wall with a crack that drove breath out of me. I pressed my hands to the wound, tasting blood. Consciousness threatened to bleed away. The liaison officer stood over me, breathing steady despite the violence he'd wrought. "Rest now," he said. "When you wake, you will serve." I felt a cold trickle run down my spine. Fear, rage, exhaustion all tangled together. My flashlight had fallen, and its beam lay dead on the ground. Darkness closed around me like a lid. I awoke to voices, distant, clipped civilian tones, and to the rattling jingle of a stretcher. My head pounded, 1,000 needles pricking my skull. I blinked against harsh white lights, took in a hospital room, sterile, humming with equipment, monitors beeping in a steady rhythm. I felt bands on my arms and a plastic tube wicking away blood. My uniform had been replaced with a hospital gown. My left arm throbbed violently, and pain flared when I tried to breathe. I rolled my head to the side. A figure stood behind the curtain. Two shapes, really. A uniformed officer and a woman in civilian clothes. The officer's badge read, Sergeant Millard. He looked at me with relieved exhaustion. The woman's face was familiar, Emma Clark. Her hair was tied back, eyes red-ringed from crying. She hadn't noticed me yet. "Hayes," Sergeant Millard said quietly, leaning in. "Welcome back. You've been out for—" He checked his watch. "Almost 6 hours. You're lucky to be alive." I pressed my fingers to my chest, remembering the liaison officer's voice. "You will serve." I forced myself upright. "Where are Caleb and Emma?" My voice sounded raw, hoarse. Emma rushed forward. "Deputy Hayes," she whispered, voice trembling. They found Caleb. He's in surgery. He was unconscious when they brought him in. He's going to be okay." She swallowed hard. "You saved us." "Thank you." I stared at her, chest tightening. "What about—" I faltered, remembering the liaison officer, the symbols, the cave. The man who did this? The liaison officer? Any sign of him? The sergeant's face darkened. "We inspected the cave site. The structure collapsed after your explosion. Rocks fell in, blocked the entrance. We couldn't get in without risking more lives. The rest of the cave, the altar, the artifacts, everything's buried under tons of rubble." He paused. "And we found no sign of him, no body, no tracks, nothing but debris." My breath caught. He walked out. I closed my eyes, picturing the liaison officer's silhouette framed in mist, the symbols on his skin. He walked out, and the cave swallowed itself. Emma reached for my hand. Her skin was cold. "You survived to tell us," she said softly. "That's what matters." I nodded numbly, trying to process. A monitor beep shifted beneath my fingers. I looked down. My vitals were stabilizing. My ribs burned with pain, but I was alive. I had survivors. I should feel relief. Instead, my mind churned with questions. The liaison officer's promise, the cave's hunger, those symbols glowing on his flesh. Outside the room, the hospital corridor light flickered. A soft hum thrummed through the walls. I closed my eyes. Beneath my door, I thought I heard whispered chanting. So faint it could have been the building's pipes. Then silence. I sat up straighter, heart thudding. The distant beeping of machines felt like a countdown. I pressed my palms into the sheets and stood, stiff and aching, wincing as pain shot through my side. I needed answers. Verification. Proof that I hadn't hallucinated the liaison officer's ritual, the mist, the carvings. The sergeant hovered, hand on my shoulder. Rest, Deputy. You're injured. I shook him off gently. No, I said, voice firm. I'm going back. I have to find him. He frowned. The cave's gone. It collapsed completely. But something remains, I insisted. He's out there. He'll hurt someone else. Emma's eyes brimmed with tears. Please, Deputy. I shook my head. Please get me my radio. Sergeant Millard hesitated, but stepped back, retrieving a handheld from a nurse's station. He handed it to me. I clicked it on. Static, then a faint hiss of voices. Ambulance crews coordinating, doctors. And beneath it all, something else. Chanting? I twisted the volume knob, heart racing, and the voices sharpened. Words I couldn't fully make out, layered beneath the radio chatter. I ran the frequency up and down. The chanting grew louder, rhythmic, ancient. I looked at Emma. Her face was pale, dread pooling in her eyes. You heard it? I asked. She nodded, trembling. It's him. I pressed the emergency button on the radio. This is Deputy Hayes. Request immediate backup. I have evidence of a possible ritual site. Suspect at large, armed and dangerous. Over. Silence. Only static. Then the faintest crackle, like laughter. Distant and hollow, woven into the hiss. I swallowed hard. The liaison officer's words slammed back into my mind. When you wake, you will serve. I realized then that the nightmare wasn't over. The hospital's fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, it was all too calm, too easy. The real darkness waited beyond these walls, feeding off fear, using people as vessels. And he was still out there moving silently, waiting for the next sacrifice. I gripped the radio, knuckles white. My ribs screamed in protest, but my resolve was iron. I'll find you, I whispered, the chant rising beneath my breath. I pushed off the sterile hospital bed, every muscle protesting, and stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The chanting on my radio had faded, replaced by the soft squeak of rubber soles and distant intercom announcements. Outside, the night hung low and expectant, the city's hum muted by glass and concrete. I tucked the handheld radio under my vest and steadied my breath. Each inhale cut like glass through my ribs, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was alive. Emma followed at my heels, eyes darting down the hallway. Her knock on the door to my room had gone unanswered, so I'd slipped out when the nurse left to fetch more gauze. She caught up and slipped her hand in mine. "Deputy?" she began, voice quivering. I squeezed her hand. "We're going back," I said quietly. "I need to finish this." She shook her head. "You're hurt. This goes beyond me," I interrupted, voice firm. "He's out there, planning his next move. You saw what he did. He believes he's part of something bigger, and he'll come back here if he thinks I'm vulnerable." I glanced at the radio clipped to my belt. I need my equipment, my car, my uniform, everything. We don't have time to wait for law enforcement to mobilize a team that might never reach the cave site. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You could get killed." I met her gaze. "I almost died in that cave. He nearly killed both of you. I'm going to stop him, Emma. If not me, then who?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but let me help." Her voice wavered between fear and determination. I managed a tired half-smile. "Fine, but no heroics, understood?" She returned the smile, frail but real. "Understood." We slipped into the supply closet off the nurse's station. In the shadows, I palmed a fresh bandage for my side and wrapped it as best I could. Emma rifled through a locked cabinet, vitals monitor, saline fluids, looking for anything I might need. I found a spare key ring left behind by a surgeon, a set of metal scrubs keys and a small pen light. I pocketed both. Outside, the night air hit us. It was cool, scented with ozone and distant rain that threatened but never fell. I hailed a security guard at the entrance, flashing my badge. "Deputy Hayes," I said, voice hoarse. "I need to access my cruiser in the south lot. Hit and run. Precinct vehicle. Medical emergency. Code 4. He saluted, eyes wide. "Right away, sir. I'll unlock the gate." We hurried down the ramp, two shadows weaving through lamppost halos. At the gate, I signed out the cruiser, a black and white Ford Interceptor, and we climbed in. I dropped the hospital-issued gown in the back seat and twisted into my uniform, zipping the jacket over fresh bandages. Emma sat in the passenger seat, phone in hand, ready to call anyone we needed. I punched in the cave's last known coordinates into the cruiser's GPS, based on the data from the medevac pilot. The screen flickered, then plotted a route. Back down FM 3351, past County Road 142, then off-road into the hills. I exhaled, knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "Hold on," I said, and floored the accelerator. Headlights cut through swirls of mist as we sped into the countryside. The radio crackled to life with the station playing slow, mournful country music, some late-night broadcast from Amarillo. I tuned it out, focusing on the road. Mile markers passed. 12, 11, 10. My ribs throbbed. My side burned, but I forced myself to lean into the wheel, angle the cruiser over the crest of each hill just enough to keep traction on the gravel. Emma double-checked the GPS on her phone. "There's a new marker here," she said, pointing to a drop-down menu labeled Recent Photos, Cave Site. The timestamp was just 20 minutes ago. Someone had been there, after us. "They're back," she whispered. I ground my teeth. "Keep watching the phone. Let me know if anything else pops." My radio squawked. Security checkpoint transmissions, then static. I killed the scan and slipped the handset to my ear. "Hayes here." Static. Then a voice, crisp, controlled, cut through. "Deputy Hayes? This is Lieutenant Garcia with Texas State Police. We received your distress call. Units are en route from Kerrville and Laredo, ETA 20 minutes. You read me?" I straightened in the seat. Relief and frustration tangled in my chest. "Lieutenant, I'm at the coordinates. Copy that. Hold position until backup arrives. Do not engage until units are on scene." I swallowed. "Understood." I clicked off and looked at Emma. "They're coming. We've got 20 minutes to prepare." I pointed to a clearing up ahead, moonlit and empty. "Pull over there." The cruiser coasted into the clearing. I killed the engine and opened the door. The night air rushed in, scented with pine and earth. I grabbed my shotgun from the rack, slid in a fresh shell, and slung it across my back. Emma stepped out, phone lit, documenting everything. I surveyed the area. Tall oaks ringed the clearing, their branches intertwined overhead like a Gothic cathedral. At the center, the ground was disturbed, fresh tire tracks and footprints leading toward the tree line. I knelt, examining the prints, forks of 2 tread patterns, tire marks from a dirt bike, and boot treads larger than size 11. I snapped photos and marked the direction with glow sticks I pulled from the glove box. "Look for markers," I whispered. "Rocks piled on logs, broken branches, anything that stands out." Emma scanned with the phone's flashlight tapping the screen. "Here, tree trunk, southeast edge. Branch broken about 3 feet off the ground." She marked it. I rose and set the shotgun on my shoulder. "Let's move." We entered the tree line, echoing the path we'd taken before. The canopy above swallowed our light. Emma's phone beam jittered. I pressed forward, one hand trailing along the bark of a pine tree marked with a strip of red tape. They doubled back, I muttered, reading the tape. Not my marking, fresh. I flicked out my pen light and shone it on the cut. Imprecise, like someone in a hurry. They came back through here. Emma swallowed. Why? I didn't answer aloud. My gut told me they expected us. We followed the tape deeper until the trees parted and we stood on the lip of the collapsed cave entrance. The rocks had tumbled into the shaft, but I could see darkness beyond the boulders, a yawning gap half choked with debris. The mist curled around the rock's base, swirling like smoke. I clicked off the pen light, trusted my eyes to adjust. They're waiting, I whispered. Emma shivered. What now? I reached into my jacket and pulled out the silver locket. I won't lose them again. I clicked it open to reveal Emma's picture and her brother's initials inscribed inside. Then I closed it and tossed it at the rock pile. It clanged loudly, echoing through the clearing. Silence. Then a rustle behind me. I spun, shotgun raised, only to see Lieutenant Garcia stepping into the moonlight, with 4 uniformed officers from Kerrville PD and 2 rangers. Their headlights formed a perimeter, beams crisscrossing like searchlights. Garcia nodded curtly. Deputy Hayes, we've secured the perimeter. Tell us what you see. I exhaled, stroking my beard. This cave entrance, collapsed, unstable, but they're inside or just beyond. We know they brought Emma's locket back here. And those prints, I pointed to the rock pile. He's baited us. The liaison officer, or whatever he is, set a trap. Garcia frowned. He's after you. Not just me, I said, scanning the tree line. After all of us, he wants an audience. I tapped my radio. On my mark, we advance in teams. Rangers left and right, PD center, I'll go on point with Miss Clark. We need to collapse the entrance further to prevent escape, but I need someone inside to retrieve. A shot rang out, sharp, cutting the night. Everyone froze, eyes turning toward the cave. The beam from one ranger's flashlight caught movement on the boulders. Something humanoid stepping atop the rocks, backlit by the moon, head tilted at an impossible angle. I raised the shotgun. Down, I shouted. Officers dropped behind me, weapons trained. Even Garcia ducked behind a tree. Emma pressed against my side, phone trained on the cave. The figure paused, then tilted its head, revealing a face too pale, eyes reflecting the light like lanterns. It lifted a hand, 2 fingers extended, and in its palm lay Caleb's dog tag and Emma's locket. Blood splattered across them. A crooked grin split its face. I reared up, firing. The blast rocked through the clearing. The figure staggered, emitting a high-pitched keening that vibrated in my bones. Then it jumped into the mist and vanished. The officers leapt forward, lights swinging, guns raised, but the cave was silent. Garcia barked orders. Secure the area, medic teams, prep for casualties. He turned to me. Hayes, what just happened? I lowered the shotgun, smoke curling from the barrel. Chest heaving, I met his gaze. He's not human, I whispered. He's something older, and he's in control. Garcia's jaw clenched. Then we're going in. I hesitated, looking at Emma's trembling face. She nodded once, fiercely. Together, she mouthed. I slid a fresh shell into the shotgun. Together, I agreed. Then I glanced into the darkness of the cave. Inside, something moved, shadows dancing on stone walls, lit by an unseen fire. The liaison officer's laughter echoed in my mind. When you wake, you will serve. I tightened the shotgun sling over my shoulder and felt its weight settle like a promise. I would see this through. Behind me, the Rangers and Kerrville PD officers formed a semicircle around the cave entrance, weapons trained and flashlights cutting arcs through the mist. Emma huddled beside me, trembling but steady, eyes bright in the pale beam. Lieutenant Garcia crouched at my side, eyes narrow as he scanned the darkness. The night held its breath. I took one last look at the cave mouth, where jagged rocks blocked passage, yet where shadows moved with cruel intent. Somewhere beyond that barrier, the liaison officer and the ancient thing he'd become waited, dragging Caleb and Emma's brother deeper into the bowels of the earth. I swallowed back my fear, the cold knot in my gut, and straightened. "This is it," I said, voice low but firm. "We go in, find whoever's left, collapse the entrance if we can, and get everyone out." 10-4, Garcia replied, hefting his rifle. "Teams of 2. Hayes, you and Clark center. Rangers flank left, PD right, move slow, check corners, watch for traps." "Copy," I said. Emma gave me a determined nod. She'd insisted on coming, though I tried to argue against it. She'd held firm. "I'm not leaving without my brother," she'd said, voice trembling but unyielding. I admired her courage even as my chest tightened with dread. Now I leaned close. "Stay close," I whispered, "and no matter what you hear, don't wander." She pressed my arm. "I won't," she promised. I took a breath, then kicked at a loose rock wedged in the entrance. The pile shifted, groaning as pebbles tumbled into a hidden cavity. Beyond, a tunnel yawned, wet stone walls slick with moisture, illuminated by the erratic glow of the Rangers' lights. The air smelled of earth and something metallic, faint but insistent. Lieutenant Garcia checked his watch. "Now," he said. I stepped forward first, shotgun ready. Emma immediately fell in beside me, her phone's light flickering as she recorded every inch. Behind us, officers filed in 2 by 2, rifles sweeping the gloom. The mist curled at our feet, clinging to boots like living smoke. Water dripped from unseen stalactites, echoing in the hush. The tunnel sloped downward, narrowing quickly until we walked single file. My breath came in measured hisses, a deliberate cadence to calm my nerves. Each step scraped against stone, each footfall a declaration that we would not back down. The beam from my phone illuminated slick patches where water pooled. The Rangers' lights flickered on carved symbols, ancient runes matching those etched on the liaison officer's skin. Blue lines winding along the wall in patterns that pulsed with a faint luminescence. I paused to examine them. Spirals converging on a central circle, arrows pointing deeper underground. The symbols felt alive, humming under my hand. I could almost hear a whisper carried on the damp air, a voice older than human memory whispering hunger. I clenched my teeth against a surge of nausea. "Keep moving," I ordered softly. The passage opened onto a cavern lined with crystalline walls, shimmering reflections dancing across the water that lapped at our boots. In the center, a pool of unearthly luminescence glowed, greenish-blue, like living jade. Its surface rippled with currents that moved against gravity, drawing the gaze with hypnotic pull. Emma gasped, stepping forward, but I grabbed her arm. "Easy," I hissed. "Stay back." She nodded, eyes fixed on the pool. Behind us, a ranger swore softly as he snagged his boot on a submerged root. He stumbled, spraying droplets across the cavern floor. The pool rippled violently, response, and I heard a low hum, like an engine winding up. I raised a hand. "Everyone, stay alert." Lieutenant Garcia approached the water's edge, shining his light on the stones beneath. He knelt and scooped water into a gloved hand, watching as it slipped through his fingers in slow rivulets. "Deputy, this is not natural," he murmured. "We need to neutralize whatever this is." I nodded, scanning the chamber walls. Carved niches housed jars of bone fragments, strips of flesh dried to parchment, tattered clothing pinned to spikes like banners of conquest. I realized with a start this was the liaison officer's shrine, an altar to the entity he served. Somewhere in that ritual he'd promised power. He'd woven these pieces into the cavern's magic. This was the source. I turned to Emma. "Stay close," I said again. "I'm going to find your brother." She nodded, chin trembling but resolute. I motioned to 2 rangers. "You 2 guard Emma." The rangers each slid an arm gently around her shoulders. "Don't let her out of your sight." They nodded. I leveled the shotgun, pointed down the tunnel that forked to the left. "Garcia, with me." He slid beside me, rifle ready. Together, we moved toward the left passage. The mist thickened, coiling like serpents. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground resisted our advance. The walls vibrated with low humming, a pulse matching my heartbeat. We came upon the rope from the liaison officer's belt, torn, frayed, leading into a narrow fissure. Beneath it lay a woman's boot, Emma's sister's boot, a perfect match to the locket. I knelt, removed it carefully, and pocketed it as evidence. My gaze flicked to Garcia. "He dragged someone through here," he grunted. "Makes sense. He wanted to avoid the main tunnel's traps." I flicked my flashlight into the fissure. Tight walls pressed inches from my face. Scored lines where someone had used a knife. Wet footprints led in. I squeezed through, sliding on my chest, shotgun held above. Garcia followed, jamming his rifle under one arm. The passage opened into a shaft of light, a single beam shining down from a fresh collapse in the ceiling. Stones lay piled at random, broken boulders blocking anything but a narrow gap. I set the shotgun down, pried away smaller rocks, and forced myself upward. My ribs seared, but I gripped the jagged edges and hauled upward, finally crouching atop the debris. Garcia crawled up next, swearing. From this vantage, I could see the chamber above, a larger cavern lit by torches flickering along the walls. The air smelled of smoke and spilled oil. People spoke in low tones. I shone the beam through the gap. Beneath us, on a stone dais, knelt 2 figures bound by chains. Emma's brother and another man, older, battered, eyes glazed. Both were too still to be credible. Before them, the liaison officer stood. His uniform was torn, badge gleaming in torchlight, symbols still burning blue on his skin. He raised his arms in invocation, chanting in a slow, measured cadence. Around him, robed figures pressed against the walls, shadowy silhouettes with masks joining in unison. The chant swelled, and the cavern trembled. I pressed my hand to Garcia's arm. "Stop him now." He nodded. I clambered down just enough to rest the shotgun on the rim of rock. Garcia followed. I scanned for a clear line of fire. A shot to the liaison officer to break his concentration. The robed adepts would scatter, the ritual would falter, and we could break the chains. If we hesitated, they'd complete it, and something ancient and malevolent would arise. I steadied the shotgun in my arms, aimed at the liaison officer's chest, and whispered a prayer. Then I fired. The blast echoed through the chamber like thunder. The liaison officer's chant cracked, his body jerking as the slug tore through his uniform. Torchlight flickered as sparks flew. The robed figures shrieked, scattering like startled birds, their masks clattering to the stone. Chains rattled. The older captive collapsed to the ground, blood blossoming on his shirt. But even as the liaison officer fell back, the dais glowed with blinding light. The symbols on the walls flared, deepening to a furious crimson. A low moan arose from the stone, as if the cavern itself was awakening in fury. I dropped to the floor, covering my ears as the walls groaned and cracks spidered across the rock. I crawled toward the dais, shards of stone raining down around me, and slashed at the chains binding Emma's brother. His eyes flickered, awareness returning. "Deputy!" he gasped. I cut the other man free, one of the ritualists, unconscious but alive. Behind me, Garcia struggled to his feet, holstering his rifle and drawing his sidearm. The liaison officer rose to one knee, blood dripping from his wound. He sank his fingers into the floor, and the ground split open in a radial pattern, revealing shimmering tendrils of light that writhed like serpents, reaching toward the ceiling. The air trembled, and I heard a deep, resonant hum that shook my bones. The entity was stirring. I grabbed the brother's hand. "We have to go," I shouted over the rising roar. The cavern shuddered. Dust rained from above. I yanked him to his feet. He stumbled, clutching my arm. Garcia grabbed the other captive and pulled him up. We ran for the corridor, shotgun and pistol blazing at anything that moved, torchlight silhouettes dissolving into mist as we retreated. Behind us, the cavern collapsed. Stone slabs crashed down, sealing the dais beneath a tomb of rubble. The tendrils of light stuttered, then faded. The humming died. An eerie silence claimed the space, broken only by our ragged breathing and the groans of injured men. We reached the main tunnel, sliding down the slope into the glow of Emma's lamp and the ranger's flashlights. Emma rushed forward, tears streaming. "Matt, you're alive!" Her brother, Matt, pulled her into a shaking embrace. I knelt beside the older man, checking his pulse. He groaned awake, confusion in his eyes. A ranger called medics on the radio. Distant voices crackled back. Reinforcements were pouring in, flashlights marking their arrival like fireflies. I looked back at the entrance we'd just emerged from. A wall of broken stone glowed in the torchlight of arriving officers. The collapse was extensive. The ritual chamber was buried. The liaison officer, MJ, lay where he'd fallen, blood pooling beneath him. I knelt, checking for a pulse. None. I closed his eyes, the firelight flickering across his face, a man consumed by his own obsession, now silent. I rose, body trembling. The surviving captives were receiving first aid. Emma and Matt were reunited. The older man, a hiker pressed into ritual, sat supported by rangers, staring after me in gratitude. Lieutenant Garcia approached, patting me on the shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. I swallowed, voice raw. "We did it." I glanced toward the rattled tunnel where the symbols had faded, the cavern sealed under tons of rock. But I knew the darkness we'd confronted was not gone. It was dormant, waiting for another evocation. The cave had swallowed its secrets, but its hunger remained. Emma found me, pressing her hand against my arm. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick. "You saved my brother." I nodded, focusing on the weight of her gratitude, the ache of my wounds, the slow pulsing of my heart. "Let's get you both somewhere safe," I said. "We'll wrap this up, report, evidence, everything, then you'll be home." She nodded, clinging to me. Matt gripped my shoulder. "You're my hero, Deputy Hayes." I managed a weary smile. Just doing my job. But as I guided them toward the light, sirens approaching, I felt the cavern's pull fade behind me, and then tug anew beneath my skin. The cave had fed, had awakened, and though we'd buried it this time, I knew its hunger persisted. One day, perhaps, someone else would find it. Someone with weaker resolve. And when that happened, the darkness would rise again. I took a deep breath of night air, tasting freedom and foreboding. The survivors were safe. The liaison officer was dead, the ritual was undone. But the remnants of that ancient power lingered in my bones, in the earth beneath my boots, in the whisper of wind through the mesquite trees. And I knew, no matter where I went, no matter how many miles I put between me and that nightmare, The cave and its hunger would never truly release me. I let the lights of the approaching ambulances and cruisers wash over us, their sirens piercing the night. Emma and Matt waved to me, relief and gratitude shining in their eyes. I lifted my hand in farewell, voice hushed. Stay safe. Be together. They disappeared into the swirl of uniforms and flashing lights. I watched the red and blue strobes paint the gravel road as medics loaded Emma and Matt into a waiting ambulance. Their silhouettes blurred in the flaring lights, and for a moment I thought I heard Emma call my name one last time, voice steady despite exhaustion. Then the ambulance doors closed, tires spun, and they slipped away into the night, siren fading into distant thunder. I stood alone, shotgun slack across my shoulder, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline drain settling into every muscle. My ribs still burned, each breath a reminder of how close I'd come to dying in that cavern of nightmares. Lieutenant Garcia approached through the haze of exhaust, mud-streaked and solemn. "Everything's under control," he said quietly. "We've cordoned off the area. A full forensic team will be out here first light to recover evidence and confirm the liaison officer's remains. It'll be sealed off permanently." He ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. "You did good, Deputy. You saved them." I nodded, voice caught in my throat. I just did my job. But inside, I felt fractured. Like every piece of me had been cracked in that dark, ritual-drunk cavern. I slid my radio from my vest and stared at it, half expecting it to sputter that mocking chant again. It was silent, dead, ordinary now. Garcia hesitated, then tapped my shoulder. "You should get checked. Hospital staff say they'll release you tomorrow morning. You should rest." I managed a grim smile. "Tomorrow." I tucked the radio into its holder. "Right now, I want to look around once more." He studied me and nodded. "I'll send a team. You go with them." I turned toward the tree line, every sense on alert. The mist hovered like smoke below the oaks, shivering in the headlights' glow. I felt drawn back to the narrow fissure I'd squeezed through, past the collapsed stones, into the throat of the earth where the liaison officer and that thing had performed the ritual. I took a deep breath of wet air, the odor of pine needles and loamy soil filling my lungs. It should have smelled like safety, but it smelled like the grave. Garcia gathered 2 rangers and a crime scene investigator. They approached with measured steps, flashlights and cameras in hand. The investigator, a young woman named Carter, gave me a nod. "Ready when you are, Deputy." Her voice was steadier than I felt. I offered a curt nod. We moved to the collapsed entrance, where boulders lay stacked like fallen warriors. I tapped a rock with my shotgun butt. Fragments crumbled away, revealing dark soil beneath. The mist curled into that gap like water sucked down a drain. I knelt, tracing my gloved fingers along fresh prints fading beneath fallen stones. Boot prints, wide, matched to my own. The liaison officer had escaped here. The prints implied someone had crouched, pressed their face against the rock, breathed in the cave's fetid air one last time before vanishing up another collapsed shaft or hidden back tunnel. I stood slowly, muscles creaking. Carter snapped photos. Garcia surveyed the tree line beyond. The rangers scanned with rifles ready. I closed my eyes, recalling the ritual chamber's phosphorescent fungi, the pulsing symbols, the jade pool. Then the explosion, the collapse, the escape of that inhuman thing. And the liaison officer, his body racked by the entity's final attack, yet somehow animated enough to flee. Alive. I swallowed. He got away. My voice was a rasp. No one replied, understanding hanging in the cool night air. The investigator knelt, running her fingers through the mixed mud and rock dust. Deputy Hayes, if he's still alive, she began. I shut my eyes against the sting of pain and the memory of that force shuddering through me. He won't stop, I finished, not until he's served whatever hunger he's bound to now. I opened my eyes. The mist wavered as if echoing my words. The trees sighed, branches creaking. Somewhere beyond my flashlight's reach, I felt time shift, the present loosening its grip against the pulsating dark. Garcia cleared his throat. We'll expand the search grid, get air support. A statewide bulletin. Liaison Officer Michael James, last seen here, armed and dangerous. He pulled out his radio. Command, this is Garcia, requesting all available units to the vicinity of FM 3351. Static hissed, then responded. I stepped back, letting the investigators work. My gaze trailed the ground, searching for any hint of that hidden shaft. My boot nudged something hard, a metallic glint beneath a thin layer of soil. I knelt, uncovered it. A half-burned bone wrapped in tattered fabric, the same stones and bones from that shrine. I closed my fist around it. Evidence. Proof of the darkness that had thrived here. Proof that ancient hunger had been fed once and would seek feeding again. I rose, tucking the bone into an evidence bag Carter offered. She placed it carefully in a tagged container. Garcia watched in silence, understanding that some wounds aren't healed by time or closure, that the world we walk, roads, fields, forests, can hide crumbling portals to depths beyond comprehension, and that the men sworn to protect might find themselves mere pieces in something far older. I nodded to Carter and the Rangers. Finish up. I'm heading back. I turned toward the road, each step heavier than the last. The hospital lights glowed faintly in the distance, promising blankets and painkillers, sheets to lie beneath and count the hours until dawn. But I knew, once you've seen the dark, the soft comfort of white sheets and fluorescent bulbs can't erase its shape. Garcia fell in beside me as we walked. You okay? I exhaled, chest tight. I will be, one day. I looked back once, at the collapsed cave mouth swallowed by night. The mist receded like breath exhaled, hiding broken stone and bone. But not tonight. We reached the clearing where the cruiser waited. I paused, glancing at the trees where shadows gathered. The forest seemed to lean in, curious. I shivered in spite of the warm breeze. Whatever he is, he's still alive, I said, and he's still hungry. Garcia placed a hand on my shoulder. We'll find him. I pulled away gently. Maybe. But I've learned not to underestimate something that's already eaten fear and defied death. I reached into my vest and unclipped the radio. A faint hiss rose from static. I held it to my ear. Beyond the white noise, the faintest echo drifted through. Chanting, low, insistent, wrapped in static, resonating with 1,000 years of hunger. I frowned. The frequency was off any known channel. He was broadcasting his acclaim, or a call to others like him. Whatever that voice was, it meant he wasn't alone. He was a conduit to something older, deeper, and by answering that call, he'd drawn me into something I couldn't leave behind. I clicked off the radio and slipped it back onto my vest. My ribs throbbed with each breath, but my resolve was iron. I would hunt him down. I would end this hunger or die trying, because every servant of darkness must face the light or be consumed by it. The cruiser's engine idled behind me. Headlights carved twin paths into the night. I opened the door, slid into the seat, and closed it with a thud that echoed like a judge's gavel. Garcia climbed in beside me. We sat in silence, the engine's hum a solemn drum. I placed my hand on the steering wheel, worn leather under my fingers. The radio sat silent in its holder. I exhaled, forging the silence into resolve. Behind us, the forest breathed in the aftermath. Ahead, the road stretched into darkness. I turned the key, engine roared to life, and we pulled onto FM 351. As the taillights faded into the mist, I looked in the rearview mirror. There, for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a face. Pale, angular, eyes aglow like embers, staring back from the shadows between the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. I hunched forward in the cruiser seat, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes locked on the ribbon of asphalt ahead. The wipers slapped slowly through a fine mist that had begun to fall. No more than a damp whisper of rain, but enough to blur the edges of the world outside. Behind us, Lieutenant Garcia sat rigid, radio murmuring soft traffic updates and the chatter of units converging on the old cave site. I tuned it out. My focus was ahead, on the highway's vanishing point where darkness pooled like ink. I could still taste the cave's chill on my tongue, the slick stone, the electric hum of cymbals alive, the hot iron tang of blood. And I could still feel the liaison officer's eyes on me in the rearview mirror, smoldering with power beyond any human definition. The dashboard clock glowed 3:14. I'd been on the road for over an hour, following a thread of clues I'd pieced together from the destroyed ritual chamber. Carter's bone fragments had gone to the lab. Ancient remains radiocarbon dated to centuries before Texas was even a colony. The dog tag, the locket, the torn bandana, they'd all been logged in evidence, but none of it explained how a man like Michael James could channel something so old into himself. The radio frequency I'd captured, twisted chanting buried beneath static, had been forwarded to cybercrimes. They identified it as a non-standard frequency, possibly military grade, but they couldn't decrypt the signal. Whoever James was contacting remained a ghost. I flicked on the cruiser's spotlight and pointed it at a mile marker sign. 42. My breath fogged the glass. I exhaled slowly, tasting blood from my cracked ribs. Garcia cleared his throat beside me. Deputy Hayes, he ventured quietly. We have a lead out of Laredo. Reports of a man matching James's description boarding a bus heading west. Destination, Big Bend County. He tapped his tablet. A grainy surveillance photo from the Greyhound station. Security camera angle low, the figure half shrouded by a hood. He bought a one-way ticket, left in the last 45 minutes. I nodded, adrenaline tightening my chest. Big Bend, that's 200 miles. If he's heading into the mountains, that area's full of caves and canyons, ideal for someone trying to perform a larger ritual. My voice was flat, determined. We have to get ahead of him. Garcia swiped the tablet. I've alerted the Department of Public Safety. They'll try to intercept at Marathon and Alpine, but that region is sparse, few checkpoints. He met my gaze in the mirror. You sure you want to pursue this alone? His question hung between us, laced with concern and respect. I recognized the subtext. I was the only one who'd faced James up close. Only I knew what to look for. I'm the one who saw what he's capable of, I replied softly. And if we catch him early, we can stop the next sacrifice. I glanced at Emma's locket, now framed on my dashboard by a built-in display in a clear evidence bag. The photo of her smiling face stared back at me, a reminder of everything at stake. He won't stop until he completes whatever he's planning. I have to be the one to end this. Garcia nodded, silent approval in his eyes. He reached into the glove compartment and handed me a small handheld device. Specially calibrated spectrum analyzer from cybercrimes to track that odd frequency. This should help us home in on his signal. Keep it close. I took it, clipped it to my vest, and flipped it on. The readout flickered. A soft hum at 4.38 gigahertz, just beneath the threshold of the caller's static chant. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I tapped the screen to record, then stowed it. Good, as we're gonna get. I flicked off the spotlight and rolled the cruiser onto the highway. Behind us, Garcia's screen chirped as officers updated their positions. The drive lengthened into a silent vigil. Dark fields of agave and creosote by roadside. Occasional ranch houses with dim porch lights. Gas stations with flickering neon signs. At each stop, I checked the spectrum analyzer. The frequency grew stronger, pulse faster. The bus route map I'd pulled off the Greyhound website showed a solitary road diving south of Marathon into the Chisos Mountains. The signal readout spiked at marker 56, then dipped, then fluttered as if someone toggled the transmitter on and off. Mile 70. Stronger. Mile 82. Strongest yet. I slowed the cruiser, yanked into a dusty turnout, and killed the engine. The analyzer's screen blinked bright. 4.38 gigahertz, pulsing at 0.75 watts. Enough to be handheld, portable. I glanced at Garcia. He switched off his body mic, eyes narrowed. "He's close," he murmured. "Probably set up a temporary bivouac." I snapped on my flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the black. A low breeze ruffled the brush beyond the turnout. The analyzer's hum grew louder as I stepped out. The device clipped to my chest. Garcia followed, weapon raised. I knelt in the gravel, scanning the horizon. Nothing but silhouettes of Ocotillo and Sotol. I held the analyzer up, swept it left, right. The pulsing light led deeper into the brush. I stood and pointed. That way. We pressed through thorny shrubs, cactus spines clicking underfoot, until the ground sloped toward a dry creek bed. We climbed down into the hollow, careful not to disturb loose rocks. The device chimed louder here, the pulsing light nearly constant. I clicked it on torch mode and shone the beam into the creek bed. Footprints. 2 sets, one large boot and one smaller, leading onto a flat clearing hidden beneath juniper limbs. A tarp lay crumpled at one end. I switched the spectrum analyzer's display to peak hold. The reading spiked, 0.9 watts. I knew we were on him. Lieutenant Garcia signaled to 2 troopers to circle the clearing. I drew my shotgun, chest tight with tension. We fanned out silently. Garcia to the left flank, I took the center, troopers to the right. The clearing was small, 10 feet across, dominated by a makeshift altar. Stacked stones stained dark, jars of ash and bone fragments, more baseball-sized crystals that glowed with phosphorescent sheen. The ground around it was scuffed, and in the center lay a prone figure, breathing shallowly. I eased forward, shotgun barrel low. Garcia flanked to my left, pistol drawn. The troopers covered exits. I swept the beam across the prone figure. Michael James, gaunt face drawn in exhaustion, skin mottled with blue veins tracing the ritual symbols. He lay on his back, arms splayed, chanting softly into an ancient relic. An obsidian shard carved with runes, glowing faintly red. His eyes opened, those deep-set black eyes that drank in the darkness. He smiled, slow and knowing, and whispered, "You've come at last." His voice carried the rasp of stone scraping stone. The analyzer's pulsing light suddenly went dark as if he'd killed the transmitter by will. Silence fell, thick and absolute. I leveled the shotgun. "Lieutenant James, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and attempted sacrifice of multiple persons." He laughed, low and amused. The juniper limbs rustled in the breeze. "Arrest? You can't arrest hunger. You can't imprison purpose." He rolled to his side, reaching for a jar of bone fragments. He crushed the lid under his palm, letting the shards spill onto the tarp. A gust of wind swirled through the clearing, and the crystals at his altar flared bright white, then blue, then red. The ground trembled softly. Garcia stepped forward. "Drop it, James. Put your hands behind your back." He did, slowly, deliberately, then whispered, "You think this is about me? Number I am the conduit." He tapped his chest. I ascend, channeling the right. But the hunger... His eyes rolled upward. "It must feast, and I will feed it." I raised my shotgun. "This ends now." I could hear the faint clink of keys in my vest, the handcuffs I'd brought. He wheezed a laugh, voice echoing as if in a cavern. "You cannot stop the ages. My body is a vessel. When I die, I return. When I bleed, I call forth my brethren, and they will feast on this land." He twisted his head, as if listening to distant voices. He rose to his knees, pale and thin, aura flickering around him. "Who do you serve, Deputy Hayes?" he hissed. "Your badge, your laws, those hold no power here." I swallowed hard. My ribs protested as I cocked the shotgun. "I serve the living." He broke into a twitching grin. "Then let's see who is truly alive." He lunged forward, breaking free of the trooper's surprise pounce, scattering them like rag dolls. I fired. The 12-gauge shell roared, tearing through his chest. His body jerked back, but he didn't die. Instead, the ground beneath the altar cracked, and the shrine stones tumbled into a fissure that yawned open in the earth. A deafening roar erupted from below, a resonant howl of fury and hunger that shook the clearing. The brush ignited with flashes of light, as though the ground itself was erupting in ghostly flame. I felt the heat of that flame wash over me as James rose from the rubble, unharmed, the shotgun blast hole glowing like a wound lined with light. His skin seemed translucent, veins of blue luminescence pulsing under the surface. He rose, eyes blazing. "You see? I command the abyss." He raised his arms. The crystals on the altar spun upward like motes of light, orbiting him in a halo. "And now, you will witness the feast." He uttered a guttural chant, the words older than any language I'd heard. The air warped, the world bent. Shapes emerged from the fissure. Thin, elongated forms with hollow eyes, skins slick and pale. They slithered from the earth, 8 of them at least, converging around the clearing in silent reverence. The troopers scrambled for cover, rifles raised, but frozen by the impossible sight. Garcia shouted, "Take him down!" The troopers opened fire, bullets ripping through the spectral figures, but the shapes passed through the rounds as though they were mist. Each bullet seemed to slow, then evaporate. Only the 12-gauge round that hit James had any effect, and even that was temporary. I dropped the shotgun and drew my service weapon, firing at James's heart. The rounds impacted, but failed to halt him. He laughed, a sound like grinding bone. "Your toys are useless here." My chest heaved. Around us, the earth quaked. The shapes closed in, eyes glinting in the torch and headlight glow. I backed up, pistol sweeping, heart pounding. The troopers fell back, faces pale, unconscious of procedure. Garcia fired his sidearm, but the shapes dissolved him into mist, passing through like smoke. The lieutenant stumbled toward me, arms outstretched, chanting. I fired the last bullet and saw it rip through his shoulder. He staggered, hands pressed to the wound, chanting louder. The shapes hissed, hunger audible in their breath. I dropped to one knee, flipped the magazine out, and cursed. I was out of rounds. My ribs screamed. My breath was ragged. The figures advanced. I fired my last flare cartridge into the sky. Crack. Bright red tracer raced upward, then exploded in a halo overhead. The shapes recoiled. James hissed in anger. I seized the moment, lunged at him, and drove my fist into his wound, broken glass from his own altar shard embedded in his flesh. He screamed, white bone shards rattling in his throat. The shapes shrieked as the wound pulsed with dark ichor, smoke seeping from the slit. James's body convulsed, eyes rolling back. The ritual conduit collapsed to his knees, chanting, faltering. I grabbed his collar. "It's over," I rasped. "It ends now." He laughed between gasps. "You have no idea." He pressed the shard into my fist, and I felt a sear of cold fire, threads of pain inside my veins. The shapes raised their arms in worship as the ground yawned wider. I realized then that no bullet, no artifact could stop this. The hunger was beyond killing one man. It was a primordial force, woven into the world's bones. And I had no choice but to defend what life I could. I dropped James to the ground, staggered back, and yelled, "Fall back!" The surviving troopers retreated up the embankment, dragging Garcia and bandaging his bleeding arm. Emma's locket lay in the dirt, broken open. I kicked it aside. James writhed on the ground. Half human, half spectral flame, his binding to the entity unraveling in final agony. His eyes met mine, a flicker of recognition in the dying embers. "Mary, service," he croaked, and his body dissolved into motes of ash scattered by the wind. Silence claimed the clearing. The shapes vanished back into the fissure, which sealed with a thunderous crack, as if the earth exhaled. The disinfectant scent of blood and smoke lingered in the rain-cooled air. The troopers gathered at the embankment, panting, weapons lowered. Garcia collapsed against the cruiser, head in his hands. I holstered my pistol, chest heaving with pain and relief tangled together. We watched the fissure close, the altar buried beneath shale, the highway lights at the top of the slope glowing weakly. The rain began to fall in earnest, drumming on the rocks. I dropped to one knee beside the collapsed shrine, and in the mud found a single token, a blue-veined crystal, no larger than a marble, glowing faintly despite the rain. I picked it up, cold to the touch, pulsing in my palm like a heartbeat. I turned to Garcia. "There's no clean end to this. We buried him, but the hunger remains." I crushed the crystal in my fist. It cracked, then dissolved into steam, evaporating into the night. We did what we could. He rose, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. What now? I slipped the shard from my pocket, the obsidian relic James had chanted into. I held it in the flashlight beam. Runes glowed one last time, then faded. We watch, we guard, we remember. I pocketed the shard. And we hope no one disturbs this place again. We climbed the embankment, rain drenching us, lights of the cruiser and cruiser's red and blue strobes reflecting in muddy puddles. Behind us, the fissure lay sealed, but I knew the earth had swallowed a darkness that would dream again. And when that dream woke, so would the hunger. Lieutenant Garcia climbed into the cruiser, bandaged but alive. I closed the passenger door beside him, then walked to the driver's side, hands trembling. The highway stretched before me, slick and shining under the rain. I slid behind the wheel, inserted the key and turned it. The engine purred. I looked at Garcia in the rearview mirror. "Let's get out of here." He nodded. "Deputy Hayes, what do you feel right now?" His voice was low, uncertain. I settled my gaze on the windshield. "I feel alive," I said. My ribs ached, the rain stung my face, and my soul trembled with what I'd witnessed. And I feel like I'll never be the same. We pulled onto the highway, tires hissing. The red and blue strobes faded in the distance. The rain smudged the world into shadows and reflections. Up ahead, the road dipped into darkness, winding toward the unknown. I pressed the accelerator, the cruiser surging forward into the night. And as we drove away from the feast, I realized that some darkness can only be outrun, not destroyed, and that the hunt never truly ends. I remember the sun dipping below the horizon as I slid into my patrol car that evening, the thermometer on the dashboard still reading 92 degrees despite the late hour. My name's Sergeant Elijah Eli Carter, 12 years on the force in rural Texas, half a dozen of them on the night shift. My partner was off that night, so I brewed a cup of bitter black coffee in the squad room before heading out alone. The air was thick with the scent of mesquite and dust, a humid stickiness that clung to my uniform as I eased onto County Road 142. My shift had been quiet. Traffic stops for broken taillights, an alarm call at the feed store that turned out to be a raccoon in the attic. But right around 11:47 p.m., dispatch crackled to life with a call that would change everything. Unit 47, we've got a 1023 missing person report. Caller last spoke with his sister who hadn't been seen in 2 days. Locations 12 miles north on FM 219, property of an abandoned farmhouse. Caller reported hearing what sounded like footsteps in the fields behind the house. He tried calling back but got a silent hang-up. Proceed with caution. There was a hollow in my chest when I heard it. Missing person calls weren't rare, but the way dispatch mentioned the hang-up and the caller's fear tightened a knot in my gut. I acknowledged the call, checked my flashlight, and reminded myself, protocols first, emotions later. I flicked the light switch in the car overhead, slammed the door, and walked toward the gate, its rusty hinges creaking a warning as I nudged it open with my boot. The gravel road ahead vanished into darkness, save for the thin yellow beam cutting through the night. Minutes later, I pulled up to the edge of the property. No porch lamp, no motion light. Just the silhouette of the 2-story farmhouse framed by skeletal trees swaying in a breeze that smelled of damp earth and old secrets. I parked the Crown Victoria at an angle so my headlights faced the door, engine still running in case I needed a quick getaway. I killed the overhead light, brought my flashlight to life, and checked my sidearm. My radio sat silent, as if even dispatch was holding its breath. I approached the front door on the balls of my boots, eyes scanning every broken window shutter, every loose board. There was a faint rustle behind me, grass brushing against the car roof, but I pushed it from my mind. I knocked once, waited 5 seconds, knocked again, louder. "Sheriff's office," I called. "Deputy Carter, we got a missing person report. You okay in there?" My voice sounded small in the vast quiet. No answer. The door was locked. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing but the steady hum of cicadas beyond the walls. I radioed dispatch. 47 to dispatch, no answer at front door. All windows secured, looks abandoned. I moved to the windows, peering inside. The living room was empty, an old couch shredded by time, an overturned chair. Dust motes danced in the beam. I circled the house, flashlight tracing gaps in the siding and nails jutting from rotted wood. The back door gave way under a firm push, a single crack splitting the night as the jamb surrendered. I paused, every muscle tight. Dispatch, entering through rear, proceeding with caution. Inside, the house reeked of stale air and mildew. My boots left prints on the dirt-floored hallway. I swept my light methodically across walls peppered with water stains, across the kitchen where an oil lamp sat intact on the countertop, untouched for who knows how long. My heartbeat slowed, measured, until I heard it. A faint whisper of movement from above, like fabric brushing wood. I crept up the creaking staircase, flashlight in my left hand, service pistol ready in my right. Each step groaned under my weight, announcing my presence. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched, doors to the left and right. My beam landed on the first bedroom. Mattress bare, dresser drawers empty. Then the second, a child's bedroom, doll lying face down, curtains drawn tight. Too tight. The window cracked open just enough for someone to slip through, if they'd wanted. My mind raced. The missing woman was the caller's sister, age 32, name of Sylvia Monroe. She'd lived alone after their parents died 2 years earlier. Childhood trauma, according to her brother's frantic voice. He said she'd been talking about leaving, about escaping the memory of her father's farm accidents. They hadn't heard from her in 48 hours until that 911 call. Now, no one inside. I made my way back down, breath coming faster than I liked. Outside, the wind had risen, rattling windows like 1,000 fingernails. That's when I heard it. A rhythm, soft at first, a footstep drag, coming from the tall grass field east of the house. I trained my flashlight on the horizon. Nothing moved beyond the shadows. But I heard it again, boots on gravel coming toward the house. "Dispatch, I've got movement outside," I whispered into the mic. No immediate response. I drew closer to the front door, hand on the handle. My finger tingled near the trigger guard. I yanked the door open. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I swept my light in wide arcs. The yard was empty, only the tall grass swaying under a pale moon. I stepped onto the porch, and the wood groaning beneath me. Then I saw it. Footprints in the gravel leading away toward the tree line. 2 sets, one boot, the other bare. I crouched, shining the beam, prints made an hour ago, maybe less. A faint sound, like muffled sobbing, drifted from the east. I holstered my pistol, pulled out my radio. "Dispatch, I'm following tracks east. Request backup and medical." My voice wavered, but I forced calm. My flashlight bobbed ahead, illuminating a narrow path through waist-high grass. The sobbing grew louder, raw pain, desperate human, and I pushed forward, each step taking me into deeper darkness. The path opened onto a clearing where the ground was churned as if by a plow. In the center lay a shotgun shell, brass glinting in the moonlight. Beside it, a scrap of torn fabric, floral print, Sylvia's dress. I felt bile rise. I swept my light beyond, nothing. Silence. Then behind me, crunch. Someone walking on broken glass. My heart pounded. I spun, pistol raised. The beam found a figure hunched by the old well at the clearing's edge, head bowed. "Deputy Carter," the voice quivered. "You gotta help her." I ran forward, cold sweat beating at my temples. The man's face came into view, gray in the flashlight's glare, eyes wild. He pointed to the darkness beyond the well. "She's down there, please." I flicked on the lantern my grandmother gave me as a kid, its yellow glow warm against the night. I shone it over the well's edge. Water, black as oil below, ripples breaking as if something moved beneath. My radio crackled. "Unit 47, backup en route. ETA 3 minutes. Time slowed. I peered down again. A hand surfaced, pale, slim, nails caked with mud, gripping the well's stone lip. Sylvia's voice floated up, faint but real. "Help me, please." My world narrowed to that moment. The weight of my badge, the chill of the well, the ragged sound of her breath. I tied a rope around my waist, clipped my belt to a metal stake, and began my descent into darkness, each foot on the damp stones echoing in my ears. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt, vertigo spinning through my skull. Above, the tall grass rustled like laughter. Below, a shape slid through the water toward me, arms outstretched. I shone my light, and there she was, Sylvia Monroe, eyes wide with terror, body half submerged, trembling. Her hair fanned in the water like dark seaweed. I reached for her, voice steady. "Sylvia, hold on, I've got you." My gloved hand closed on her wrist. She flinched, water splashing over the ledge, soaking us both. As I hauled her up, stone by stone, I felt something brush against my leg, cold, wet. Something I didn't question until I was halfway up. It clung, like 100 fingers brushing my ankle. My heart slammed. I looked down, murky water churning but nothing visible. My breaths were shallow. I cinched the rope, hoisted Sylvia's limp form, ignoring the panic rising in my chest. She came up coughing, sputtering, eyes locked on me, mouth forming words I couldn't hear over her gasps. I staggered back onto solid ground, backing away from the well as she collapsed into my arms. The first backup unit's headlights washed over us like salvation. I fumbled over the radio. "Dispatch, suspect unknown, but victim recovered. Send EMS ASAP." My legs trembled. I half-carried Sylvia toward the cruiser, ignoring the wetness in my boots. The man who'd pointed me here cowered under a mesquite, shaking his head. In the harsh white glow of the patrol car's spotlight, Sylvia looked at me, drenched and haunted. "Thank you," she whispered, voice raw. I nodded, numb, as the medic took her inside the ambulance. I watched the doors close, the engine roar, then turned back toward the well. The rope lay slack, water still dancing in the crack of stone. I shone my light one last time into that darkness, hoping it had given up its secrets. Instead, the beam struck something snagged on a jagged edge, tattered denim and a single silver earring glinting like a tear. I couldn't move. Backup arrived, voices calling out, radios sputtering. I holstered my pistol and stepped back, the weight of what I'd found settling in my bones. My mind refused to let go of that earring, shining like a question in the night. I radioed dispatch again, voice flat. "Unit 47, there's something else down here. Need crime scene." As I waited, the wind carried a whisper up from the well, soft, teasing, a woman's sigh. I stared into the darkness, heart pounding, knowing that whatever had happened tonight was far from over. The night seemed to lean in closer, and I realized then that some mysteries don't end when you think they do. The beam from my flashlight cut through the humid blackness as I stood at the edge of that well, the crime scene tape snapping in the wind behind me. Sheriff's deputies milled about, crouching to bag evidence. A single muddy boot print pressed into the grass, the brass shell still lying where I'd seen it. I holstered my pistol, but every muscle remained coiled, electrified by the memory of what I'd nearly become that night. I took a slow breath, pressing the button on my radio. 47 to dispatch, CSI en route. I'm going to circle back to the patrol room, check in. I tucked my phone and rose, boots sinking slightly in dew-slick grass. As I trudged back along the rutted track, headlights passing me on FM 219, the moon hid behind a ragged cloud bank. I could still taste the cold water that clung to Sylvia's hair, hear the rasp of her breath as I hauled her from that stone lip. But the well had given up more than her, that earring, that scrap of denim snagged on the ledge, proof that there'd been someone else, or something else, down there. I stopped midway, listening. The farmhouse sat like a rotting carcass in the distance, its windows' blank eyes staring back. My radio crackled with dispatch traffic, but I killed the volume. All I could hear was my own pulse. I pushed on, boots thudding through gravel, until I reached the patrol room just before 4 a.m. The lights inside were harsh, fluorescent strips buzzing overhead. I peeled off my wet jacket, handing it to Evidence Tech Martinez. whose lined face briefly registered surprise at my pallor. He nodded without a word and set the jacket in a sealed bag. I slid into a swivel chair, rubbing the back of my neck. My hands felt slick, clammy, like someone else's. Sergeant Wilson appeared at the door, 16 years on the force, my direct supervisor. His jaw clenched as he looked at me. "Carter," he said, voice low. "What the hell happened out there?" I struggled for words. "Found her down the well. She's okay, though hypothermic. But there's an earring, evidence of another person, and I don't like what I saw in that water." My voice cracked on the last word. He stepped inside, lowering the door behind him. He crouched, eyes level with mine. "Talk to me straight. You okay?" I nodded, even though my gut churned. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." I forced a wry smile. Nothing like nearly drowning a missing person to make you grateful for day shift. He didn't laugh. "We'll process the scene. You take the rest of your shift off, go home, get cleaned up." I shook my head. "Can't. I need to follow up on that earring." I tapped my vest pocket. "We need to know whose that is, and if there are more down there." He sighed, pressed a hand to his temple. "Carter, I get it. But you're running on fumes. Do your paperwork, then head back out at first light." I didn't argue. Instead, I stood, gathering my things. Photos of Sylvia on the dash of my car, taken just after she clambered into the ambulance, glanced up at me like they expected answers. I drove home in silence, the speedometer's red glow a ticking clock under my eyelids. Once inside my small duplex, I flicked on every light. The coffee maker gurgled to life. I sprawled at the kitchen table, drawing breath while black liquid drained into my mug. My phone lay open on social media. Nothing about the case. Nobody knew except dispatch and the girl who nearly drowned. And whoever, or whatever, lurched in that well behind me. At 6 a.m., I arrived back at the station. Daylight revealed details I'd missed in the dark. The farmhouse loomed as hollow as I remembered. I met with CSI and watched as they dredged the well. The water was murky. Rain had stirred it overnight, so they pumped it out, revealing slick stones and patches of rust-red algae clinging below the lip. They tagged the muddy earring and the scrap of denim, then pulled up a second object, an old pocket knife, its blade dull, handle coated in dried clay. I crouched beside Martinez as he bagged the knife. "This wasn't here when I checked," I said, voice low. "Only the earring." He looked at me, brow raised. "Think someone else was down there after you left?" I swallowed. "Or before." I spent the rest of the morning canvassing the neighbor families. No one reported seeing lights on in that farmhouse for years. Nobody heard a gunshot. One elderly farmer, Dusty Owens, lives near County Road 145, shook his head. "That house been empty since the 90s. Folks say the old owner hung himself in that barn. Cops never found a body." My stomach clenched. "You're saying there might be more than one body on the property?" Owens shrugged. "After a storm, maybe, who knows?" He spat, eyes distant. I thanked him, hands trembling around my coffee cup. I left him with a business card, told him to call if he remembered anything else. Back at my desk, the phone rang. It was the Monroe family's lawyer asking for updates on Sylvia. I told him she was safe and being checked out at Kerr County Memorial. He sounded relieved, almost giddy. "Thank God. Her brother will sleep tonight." I lied. I hadn't slept. The lawyer asked about suspects. I said the man who'd pointed me to the well was in custody for trespassing and resisting arrest, but he insisted the man was their cousin, harmless, mentally unstable. He begged me not to charge him. I hesitated. My gut told me this guy had more inside him than broken memories. But guidelines are guidelines. I released him with a citation, instructing him to check in with mental health services. By noon, sunlight fell like judgment through the station windows. I sat in my cruiser again, scanning the well with binoculars. The stone rim still peeked above the damp grass. Something about that earring nagged me. A circle twisted into a teardrop shape, engraved with what looked like initials. I flipped it under the light. C.M. I grabbed a scrap of paper and scribbled it down. I thought of Sylvia, her eyes wide when she surfaced, her gasp as daylight burned her retinas. I thought of the footprints. One boot, one bare. Whose initials were those on the earring? And why had they been left behind? The afternoon dragged. I filed reports, coded evidence numbers. But every page I wrote turned into the echo of that woman's scream as I shot the man in the arm, the weight of her body in my arms, the brush of something cold against my ankle in the well. My head pounded, my vision blurred. I poured coffee after coffee until the station's pot ran dry. Then dispatch rolled out a bulletin. A woman matching Sylvia's description was last seen wearing a jacket with Campbell's Outfitters logo. I pulled up records. There'd been a missing person report filed 6 months ago in Midland County. Name, Carla Mitchell. She vanished after a breakup. Local news coverage dropped when searchers found no trace. No earring mentioned, no well mentioned. My blood ran cold. Was Sylvia using an alias? Or had I pulled Carla's body up that night instead? I stomped outside, the midday heat a harsh slap. My crypto notes scribbled CM beside both names. I scrolled through the Midland file pictures. Carla's hair was lighter, but otherwise too close. I ran my finger over the earring initials again, then across my temple where the bullet grazed my skull that night back in training. Something snapped inside me. Rage, fear, exhaustion. I shoved my cruiser into gear, tires squealing, and tore down FM 219 toward Midland. Dispatcher tried to hail me, but I ignored it. I needed answers. I needed to know who CM was and what her story had to do with the man laughing in that basement, the girl at the well, and the earring shining like a lie in the dirt. As I crossed county lines, I felt every mile pushing me further from protocol and closer to something I was never trained for, truth. I flipped on my emergency lights, not to clear traffic, but as a warning. The storm I was chasing had begun, and nothing would stop it. I poured another coffee once I reached the Midland County Sheriff's Office, setting my jaw. I'd tell them I was just checking on a lead, a courtesy. But inside, I knew I was hunting ghosts of missing women, the ones they never found, the ones who waited underwater, whose voices echoed in the dark. I stepped into the station, coffee cup still steaming. The Midland's sun glared through the glass, and I'm certain I saw a flash of something behind me, long hair drifting in the breeze, a shape at the edge of my vision. I wheeled around. Nothing. But I heard a whisper in my ear, a voice familiar and distant. "Help me, please." My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst my ribs. I gripped the coffee cup until my knuckles went white. I'd crossed the line into obsession. I didn't know if I was chasing criminals or specters, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't stop until I'd answered every question buried in that well, every scream lost in a silent hang-up, and every name that fit those initials, CM. I set my jaw, stepped forward, and knocked on the first officer's door. "Sergeant Carter, Kerr County," I said, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I need your missing person files from the last 12 months, especially any with the initials CM. As the deputy complied, I glanced at the badge on his chest. Midland County Sheriff's Office. Our eyes met. and I swear I saw his pale reflection flicker. A face older, hollow, haunted. He slid the file across the desk. I opened it and found a photo that stole the air from my lungs. The woman's eyes were identical to Sylvia's, but her smile held a secret I couldn't yet read. And somewhere in that smile lay the beginning of a darkness I was only just beginning to grasp. Footsteps echoed down the linoleum corridor of the Midland County Sheriff's Office. Each click a cold reminder that I'd crossed into someone else's jurisdiction, and into a labyrinth far darker than missing person reports or basement standoffs. I cradled the file in my left hand, the photo inside pressed against my palm like a brand. The woman in the image stared back with wide, haunted eyes. The same eyes I'd seen in Sylvia Monroe, the same eyes staring up at me from the well's black water. I flipped the page and saw her name, Carla Mitchell, the initials on the earring. CMI swallowed, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. My throat ran dry. I thanked the clerk and stepped into the hall, file tucked under my arm like a grenade. I needed fresh air. I pushed open the heavy door and walked into a narrow alley behind the station. The sun had slid past its noon apex, and the heat bounced off the concrete walls with punishing intensity. I tugged off my duty belt, pistol, taser, radio, set it on a trash bin, and ran a hand over my face. A bead of sweat trickled into my eye, stinging. I fished the earring from my pocket where I'd stashed it. The silver surface gleamed despite the grit caked in its creases. I traced the initials with my fingertip, feeling the cold metal sharpen my focus. Carla Mitchell. Sylvia Monroe. Carla Mitchell. The names spun in my head like a tormentor's wheel. The file had photos of Carla. A younger woman, smiling in sunlight, arms wrapped around friends at a music festival in Austin. The vivacious blonde from the Midland County files bore no scars, no hint of the terror she'd suffered, if she was the same person at all. I needed confirmation. I needed to see Carla's dental records, her last known address, her phone logs. I needed every scrap of data to stitch together a timeline that made sense. I pressed my phone, keyed a text to CSI Martinez. Need MDFR dental and phone records for Carla Mitchell. Missing June last year. Code RED, hold everything. While it sent, I tucked the earring into the file, then slipped the file into my patrol coat. I snapped the belt back onto my hips and jogged back inside. Inside the front lobby, deputies milled around, grabbing coffee and chatting about lunch runs. Nobody glanced twice at me, just another sergeant on a fact-finding mission. I nodded at Sergeant Wilson, who stood by the front desk, arms crossed. He gave me a curt nod back. No questions. Good. I didn't want to broadcast the fact that I was chasing ghosts. I marched to a side office labeled Records. A deputy seated there looked up, bored. I cleared my throat. Deputy Lee, I need expedited access to Carla Mitchell's case files. I have jurisdictional clearance from Kerr County, and I'm working a joint investigation. He raised an eyebrow, but I slapped my badge on the desk and set the Midland file down. Serious case. Missing person turned potential homicide. Her sister's in Kerr County. This goes beyond a local MPR. He studied the badge, then the photo peeking from the file. Finally, he sighed and pressed a button under his desk. I'll send you her full file digitally in 5. Let me know if you need more. I nodded my thanks and left. Back at my cruiser, I plopped into the driver's seat, the heat inside stifling. Sweat beaded at my hairline. I started the engine and flipped the file open. Incident reports, interviews, sketches of her last known movements. The timeline was sparse. Last seen June 3rd at a motel off I-20. No phone pings after midnight. No GPS breadcrumbs. The only clue, an Uber driver's note of a second passenger. A passenger he never saw, but whose scent he remembered. Cheap cigar smoke mixed with something floral. Cigar smoke, floral. The same scent I'd caught in the farmhouse basement when I pressed into that first house months ago. The same scent that clung to the air around the locked basement door. My pulse spiked. I thumbed to the witness statements from Odessa. A motel clerk reported a trucker carrying 2 duffel bags, wearing a baseball cap low, face hidden, laughing to himself when he thought no one was listening. The clerk thought the man was harmless. No one batted an eye, but I knew harmless-looking men. I'd met a lot of them in 12 years on the night shift. Quiet types with half-lidded eyes who smiled too easily. Men who walked off duty with a sigh, then came home and locked the door behind them with trembling hands. I slammed the file shut. I needed to see that well again. I needed Carla's body pulled from the water. If Carla was buried there, then Sylvia Monroe was someone else. Where was Sylvia? Was she even alive? The answers lay beneath dark water, tangled in roots and slime, and I was the one who dropped her, twice. First, when I shot a man laughing in his own twisted survival game. Second, when I hauled a near-drowned woman by her arm from the well. I'd dredged her from the abyss, but what else had I dredged? I flipped on the siren lights, blue and red blur in my rear view. Deputies scattered out of the way, but I barreled past them, heading south on Interstate 20 toward Kerrville, where the farmhouse waited. I didn't stop for coffee or food. I didn't call dispatch. I needed daylight on that well, control over the scene before SSI trampled my leads. By the time I crossed into Kerr County again, the sun was dipping low, gold bleeding into orange. The farmhouse loomed once more, gate open, porch dark. I parked in the same spot under the mesquite. This time, I didn't announce myself. I slipped out of the car, moving like a predator stalking its own memory. I checked my phone. Carla's file awaiting my download. Her dental charts, phone logs, all in the cloud now, pinned to my screen. But first, I needed to confirm that well. I approached it barefoot, kicking off my boots. The stones were cool, slick with algae. I crouched, peered into the black pool. A shimmer at the bottom caught the last rays of sun. Something metallic. I reached in, fingers brushing water so cold I gasped. My hand closed on a small rusted locket. I pried it open. Inside, the portrait of a little girl, no older than 7, carved in faint enamel, hair painted brown, eyes sad. My heart thudded. I dropped the locket, watched it swirl away in the murk. The water trembled as if alive. A voice whispered behind me, low and melodic. Find me. I spun. Empty field. The farmhouse windows dark. I knelt, scooping up soil. Specks of dried clay stuck to my palm. Clay from the pocket knife handle, from the well's edge. I pressed it to my nose. The dusty scent of earth, of secrets long buried. Then a second scent. Cigar smoke twisted with something floral. Faint, but unmistakable. I staggered upright, boots back on, siren off. The farmhouse and well were silent witnesses. My reflection in the locket's glass was pale, haunted, eyes wide, impossible to ignore. Carla Mitchell, Sylvia Monroe, the missing women whose names I'd stitched together with bullets, ropes, and earpieces. The initials carved into silver. The locket with a child's face. I realized the truth had nothing to do with names. It was a pattern. Abductions, forced submersion, signs left to haze the trail. A revolver, a shotgun shell, a floral scrap, an earring initial, a child's locket. Each token angled to confuse, to lure someone, maybe me, into the depths. Someone hunting souls. Someone like me, patrolling the edges of law, drawn to darkness by duty and obsession. My radio crackled, dispatch calling. I tapped the mic. 47 on scene. My voice sounded distant. I found a locket at the well, its evidence. I need a full dive team and a homicide unit. I stared at the well, its black mouth yawning like a warning. The breeze rustled mesquite leaves overhead. Shadows clung to the house. I felt the ground shift, a tremor in the silence. The whisper came again, closer. Finish it. My breath caught. I gripped the locket's half-buried chain in my pocket, the metal warm against my thigh. The final milepost in a journey that began with a simple missing person call and plunged me into a spiral where every clue was a trap, every truth a weapon. I lifted my flashlight and trained it on the well, its beam a thin line cutting into the void. I drew my sidearm, checked the magazine. Backup lights painted the scene in stark contrasts. Deputies flanked me, kneeling to bag the locket and photograph the rim. The locket photo fell open on the grass. Child's face staring skyward. I knelt, hands shaking, and closed it with a snap that echoed like a verdict. The sun sank behind me. I rose, spine rigid. Protocol called for waiting. Evidence collection, interrogation, warrants. But I felt the weight of the night pressing me to act. Someone wanted me to finish it. I scanned the tree line, the field, the empty windows of the farmhouse. My gut screamed, "This is just the beginning." I holstered my pistol and turned away from the well. The whispers faded, replaced by the distant thunder of an approaching storm. Or was it the siren of a train in Kerrville? I couldn't tell. I walked back to my cruiser, locket and evidence bag, file of Carla Mitchell braced on the passenger seat. My reflection in the rearview mirror was a man unraveling at the edges. Exhausted, haunted, more prey than predator. But I'd promised to chase down every ghost, every fragment of a name, until the pattern broke or I broke. I drove away from the farmhouse, dirt kicking up behind me. The wind whipped across County Road 142, carrying the scent of approaching rain and something floral, smoky, that lingered on my breath. I glanced at the road ahead, endless black ribbon under the storm-washed sky, and whispered to the ghosts in the well and the women I'd never let die, "I'm coming." The sky tore open in jagged flashes of lightning as I sped south toward Odessa, the rain beginning in fat, cold drops that plastered my windshield and rattled the roof of the cruiser. I didn't slow down, the wipers barely kept pace, as I followed the highway into the heart of West Texas. Every mile marker felt like a countdown, each one another second closer to something I both dreaded and needed. Carla Mitchell's initials burned on my mind, shimmering with every flash of high beams. CM. I whispered it over and over, like a mantra, trying to make sense of how two missing women, two strangers in my files, two locket and earring tokens could be pieces of a puzzle whose edge I hadn't even glimpsed yet. I pulled off at exit 102, County Road R159, and drove through shuttered motels and vacant storefronts until I found what I was looking for. The faded sign of Mitchell's Motor Lodge, where the last credible sighting of Carla was logged. The neon letters sputtered in the downpour, half lit. Motel. A single barrel-chested desk clerk huddled behind plexiglass, his cigarette smoke curling into the stale humidity of the lobby. I opened the door, setting off a bell that rang twice before I slid up to the window. "Sergeant Carter, Kerr County Sheriff's Office," I said, tapping my badge. Water dripped off my hat brim. "I'm following up on a missing person report for Carla Mitchell. She was last seen here June 3rd of last year. I'd like to review your registration logs and any security footage." My voice was low, authoritative. He blinked, then peered down at a dusty binder. "Carla Mitchell," he muttered, flipping pages. "Stayed in room 12, checked in late. Checked out 2 days later, but nobody booked in after. Footage. Our cameras point at the office door and parking lot. I can show you." He slid the glass door open, his sideways glance surprised, either by my urgency or by his own suspicion. I nodded, following him into a cramped back office lit by a single bulb. He queued up footage on an old monitor, timestamp reading June 4th, 11:22 p.m. Grainy black and white showed Carla's blonde hair slipping from her shoulders as she lugged 2 duffel bags into the rain. She paused at the desk to sign the ledger. The clerk behind the glass handed her a key. She turned, umbrella tipping back and forth. Then she crossed the parking lot toward the rear exit. 2 men in 18-wheeler caps watched from the driver's seats of a big rig, idling under a flickering street lamp. She hesitated, looked over her shoulder, into the cab's shadowed interior, then nodded and slipped between them. The truck's door stayed open just long enough for her to duck inside. She vanished. My knuckles whitened around the file folder as I watched her silhouette disappear into the semi-trailer. No sign of struggle, no scream. Just a nod, a barrel of steel, and then blackness. They cut the feed. The clerk's cigarette burned low. That trucking company's out of Albuquerque. Name's Red Sky Freight. You want to call them, see who that driver was? I committed his information to memory, grabbed the file and stepped back into the lobby, the thunder outside rattling windows like gunshots. My phone buzzed. A text from Martinez. Dental records downloaded. Teeth match Carla Mitchell's chart. Positive ID. My stomach pitched. I opened my cruiser door into the downpour and slammed in, keys already in the ignition. Rain pattered, wiper blades whipped. I dialed dispatch. 47 to dispatch. Send me logs from Red Sky Freight, truckers based in Odessa and Midland terminals. I need names, manifests, now. I hung up, racing thoughts spinning. I was stretching my jurisdiction thin, but time was the enemy here. The freeway stretched ahead, serpentine ribbons of rain-slick asphalt guiding me east. My mind churned through the details. Sylvia Monroe saved from the well. Carla Mitchell spirited into a semi-truck. Initials on jewelry linking them. Faint whisper urging me to finish it. The line between rescuer and victim blurred in my rear view. I needed a break, a moment to recalibrate, but adrenaline pummeled my veins, drowning any semblance of exhaustion. I punched in Red Sky Freight's corporate number. On the third ring, a gravel voice answered. Red Sky Freight dispatch. This is Sergeant Carter, Kerr County. I need driver logs for truck number TX80875-3, early June last year. Name of the driver. Route details, anything. A pause. 1 second. The line crackled. Driver was a Michael Teller. Picked up at Albuquerque Yard June 4th, destination Odessa. Driver logged as single operator, no co-driver. What about overnight guests or any unusual stops? Not in our manifest, just local drop-offs around Odessa and Midland counties over the next 2 days. I pressed for specifics. Times, weigh-in records, fuel receipts. By the time I hung up, I had enough to trace Teller's circuit. Amarillo, Odessa, Pecos, back to Albuquerque. His route sliced through the barnyards and oil fields, the scrub prairie where cell towers are as rare as water sources. Perfect hunting ground. I punched Odessa into my GPS and clutched the wheel. Why had Teller picked up Carson? Why had Carla climbed into his rig without protest? Maybe she knew him. Or maybe she was desperate. I drove into a twilight that looked tarred, the storm turning the horizon to ink. I tattooed the accelerator, pushing the cruiser to the limit. I arrived at Red Sky's yard just outside Odessa's industrial sprawl. Semi-trailers lined the perimeter like sentries. A single security camera blinked atop a light pole. I parked beyond the chain-link fence, grabbed my raincoat, and crept along the fence line until I found the trailer I'd seen in the footage. Number TX88753. Its tires glared slick in the headlights. No cab lights, door sealed. I ran my gloved hand along the rivets. Cold, indifferent steel. The keys from the registry were long gone, likely destroyed with the logbook. I rifled through the gravel shoulder for footprints. Large lugs, 22-inch tires. Nothing new. Then I noticed an indentation in the dirt beneath the trailer's rear. Barefoot sole marks, faint but clear. I knelt, breath visible in the damp air, and made a plaster impression with a stick in the edge of my glove. Barefoot. Carla again? Or someone forced? A movement behind me made me spin, pistol drawn. A security guard in a neon vest, shotgun slung over his shoulder, stared at me. "You lost, officer?" he yelled over the wind. I raised one hand. "Sergeant Carter, Kerr County. Trucking Laws Inquiry. My phone call?" He snorted. "Dispatch told me you're stirring up shit. This is private property." I holstered my weapon, laid my badge on the fender. "I'll cooperate. I just need to see your driver logs and the truck's inspection record from June." He looked at my badge, then at the guard shack, too far away to see the monitor. Finally, he nodded, eyes wary. "1 second." He walked over, returned with a clipboard and binder. I flipped to Teller's name, Michael Teller, license number, inspection notes blank. No hint of unusual wear or chemical traces. I jotted down his signatures, date stamps, then my eyes landed on a handwritten note in the margin. "Locket recovered from sidewell. Dust in wheel well." My heart seized. Sidewell? The report must have come from someone who found the locket near a well, the same one I'd dredged. How did Teller's truck wheel well pick up that dust? Had he driven through the farmhouse property? I closed the binder, pressed his collar. "Where were you on that property, Teller?" He paled. "I don't know what you mean, officer." I pressed harder. "Your rig drove on County Road 142, dirt track to that farmhouse. What were you doing there?" He licked his lips, looked past me at the fence, then back. I come through on supply runs, deliver feed to farms." "Which farms?" "Give me addresses and times." He hesitated, sweat mixing with rain. "Odessa Feed Company deliveries, random sequence." He flicked his eyes to the darkness. "But I never went near a well." His eyes flicked with fear. I sensed a lie. My gut told me this man thrived on secrets. I nodded, closed my notebook. "I'm seizing this truck and your logs. Any interference, and I'll bring you in on obstruction charges." He sagged, shoulders slumped. You can't do that. I already have." I called dispatch. 47 to dispatch, unit to tow. TX88753 for impound and forensic exam. Driver possibly involved in missing person aggregate. Arrangements for detention pending. I hung up. Teller's face drained. He shook. "You don't understand. You don't—" "I will," I said. "You will." I cuffed him and read Miranda, rain dripping off my hat brim. He swore at me under his breath, a string of curses that ended in a plea. "I didn't kill her." I watched as he was led away, eyebrows tight with fear. I turned back to the trailer, rain pelting the corrugated steel. I shone my light at the wheel wells, fanning out the beam until it settled on specks of red clay, some of it still caked in grooves. My breath hitched. I knelt and scraped some onto a paper towel. The same clay that lined that well in Kerr County. The same clay that clung to that pocket knife. The same that stuck to the earring before Carla's brother found it. I wrapped the sample in tin foil and pocketed it. The wind roared through the yard, lightning slicing the sky open again. illuminating rows of silent trailers. My phone buzzed. Text from Martinez. Cigar, residue, and well match on trailer analysis. Floral notes confirmed. My pulse roared. I closed my eyes, pressing my fist to my brow. Every piece pointed back to Teller in that rig. But why had he left a trail? Flowers, soil, locket, earring. Why toy with me? A whisper drifted on the wind. Finish it. I stared at the trailer's dark belly, at the slick mud in the wheel well. My reflection flickered under the lightning. Sergeant Carter, soured by obsession, drawn deeper into a hunt no training had prepared me for. I rose, boots squelching in the mud. I returned to my cruiser, leaving Teller's rig impounded under floodlights. I sat behind the wheel, rain beating on the windshield, and keyed the radio. Dispatch, 47. I'm en route back to Kerr County with the suspect and evidence. Notify homicide and forensics. This is escalated. I'll brief them on arrival. The storm hit full force as I pulled onto the highway, tires humming through puddles. My mind churned with questions. How many victims? How long had this been going on? Who else had been trapped in wells, hidden in rigs, erased from existence? The initials CM had led me here, but the true pattern was just emerging, like shapes in storm clouds before the rain. I drove through the tempest, headlights slicing through sheets of water, until Kerr County's sign rose through the haze. Each drop of rain sounded like a heartbeat, each flash of lightning a pounding in my chest. I gripped the wheel and whispered into the dark, "I'm coming." The night swallowed my words, and I knew it would take more than grit and protocol to finish this. It would take confronting something beyond human cruelty, something that thrived on being unseen, on hiding in the spaces between evidence and explanation. But I was the one who'd drawn its attention. I was the one committing to the end. The rain eased to a hush as I crossed County Road 142 again, the farmhouse beckoning from behind skeletal trees. The trailer and the suspect would follow in tow, proof that the chase was real, that I was closing in. But the real darkness waited behind those boarded windows and inside the cold well. And I was no longer certain which piece of evidence would break this wide open, or which would break me first. I crossed the Kerr County line just as the first pale fingers of dawn began to pry the night apart. My cruiser's tires hissed on wet pavement, headlights carving two streaks into the fog that clung to the fields. Behind me, the impounded Red Sky freight rig and Michael Teller rattled along in the wrecker's jaws, a metal shark on tow. But all I could see was the farmhouse's silhouette, squat and accusing under the gray sky. I'd briefed the homicide unit over the radio, clogging paperwork, coordinating crime scene teams, lining up the coroner for a well dive. They'd be there soon. For now, I was alone with the ghosts. I parked 50 yards from the well, left my emergency lights off, and stepped into the damp morning air. The wind had died, leaving a spectral stillness. I tugged the locket from my jacket pocket, child's face rimmed in silver, and slipped it gently back into its evidence bag. Then I knelt at the well's edge, the stone slick with condensation, and carefully cleared a patch of grass, the same bare patch where footprints told of a sobbing woman and a barefoot predator. I rolled the plaster I'd made of that footprint onto the grass, lining it up with my boots. The impression fit. Barefoot. My breath caught imagining Carla or Sylvia stepping into that clearing, alone, hunted. I pressed my palm to the cool stone and closed my eyes. I'd thought this was a simple missing person. Run. Now I understood. This was a trap, littered with tokens to lure me in. A discarded earring, a shotgun shell, a child's locket, traces of clay in a wheel well. All roads converged here, All victims had passed through this void. My phone buzzed. A text from Martinez with a single line. Cigar, floral residue on knife matches trailer. Earring metal matches locket. My throat went dry. He was right. The same orchestration repeated: smoke, clay, metal tokens. Whoever orchestrated this knew how to leave clues that were personal but misleading, like a predator dangling breadcrumbs before closing in, and I'd walked right into it. I rose, brushing dew from my jeans, and walked to the farmhouse's front door. CSI had taped a perimeter, but I slipped past. Old wood groaned like a warning. Inside, dusty floors stretched into shadowy corners. The air smelled of mold and stale cigarette smoke. I swept my flashlight across the walls. Fingerprints dusted at chest height, not mine. I knelt, brushing powder from a broken doorknob, partial ridge detail, too smudged to lift, but deep enough to know someone forced it open before I arrived. I traced the hallway to the kitchen, where the oil lamp still sat on the counter. I lit a match, flickering flame revealing long scratches on the wood surface. Scratch marks, like a fight, or desperate attempt to escape. I eased up the stairs toward the bedrooms. In the second room, where the child's doll lay face down, I spotted fresh footprints in greenish mold on the floorboards. One barefoot, one booted. I shone my light on them, then stepped on the boot print lightly, confirming the pattern matched teller's license plates. Size 12, heavy tread. My blood ran cold. He'd been here, inside this house, before I ever arrived. He'd touched every surface I'd investigated. He'd watched me approach, waited for me to clear the building, then slipped away. Or maybe he'd been waiting in the basement, laughing like a child at a puppet show. I descended to the basement door, memories clawing at my mind. That dial tone's scream. The laugh stifled behind a hand, the glint of the revolver. I pressed my ear to the door, nothing but my heartbeat. I tested the knob, locked. I shoved it open and stepped inside. The beam revealed the landline, handset off hook. Speakers still distorting a faint hum. My flashlight revealed long grooves on the phone cradle, as if someone had dragged a blade across it. I knelt, ran my glove over the fresh rust. My pulse spiked. Teller's pocket knife. He'd brought it here, carved fear into my memory, and left it behind. I swept the beam to the far corner where the man had stood. The concrete floor was stained not just with water damage, but with darker smears. Dried clay mixed with reddish streaks. I scooped some into an evidence bag. The smell was metallic, oppressive. I imagined Sylvia's hand gripping the phone, her terror echoing in empty walls. I imagined Carla's eyes when she looked up at the cab of that semi, trusting or terrified. The basement was a chamber of witnesses, each clue a silent scream. I climbed the 5 creaking steps out of that underground tomb and found myself in the kitchen's doorway. Morning light seeped through broken shutters, illuminating a brittle newspaper clipping tacked to the wall above the counter. Article from 1998 about the farmhouse owner's disappearance. Declared dead after a flood washed away his barn and body never recovered. A sepia photo showed a man in overalls, hat pulled low, leaning on a wooden fence. Underneath, someone scrawled in black marker, "Never alone." My breath caught. The farmhouse had birthed its own legends, well tragedies, the father's disappearance, a series of vanishings tied by initials on jewelry, PM, CM, SM. My locket bore CM initials. Sylvia M. for Monroe, Carla M. Mitchell. The fabric scrap, floral print. Their initials overlapping like rings on a bullseye. This was never random. It was ritualistic. Lure people here, terrorize them, collect tokens, disappear, or kill them, and then restart, leaving breadcrumbs for the next hunter, me, to stumble over. I felt suddenly vulnerable, like a mouse caught in receding trap jaws. But this trap had a purpose: to expose, to draw out a predator who craved attention. And I was the unwitting stagehand. My radio crackled. Homicide on scene, backup requested. I answered, "Proceed with standard protocol, I'm clearing the structure." Then I added, voice low, "Search the barn ruins behind the house. I want no corner left unchecked." I inhaled deeply, squaring my shoulders. The predator behind this game wanted me to finish it. I intended to. I headed outside to the barn skeleton, nails jutting from rotted beams, planks strewn across muddy ground. I swept my flashlight across the debris until it landed on fresh footprints in the soft earth. Size 12 boot again, then barefoot alongside, dragging. I followed them into a shallow cellar beneath a collapsed wall. It was small, 4 feet squared, walls lined in old wire fencing. The floor was a patchwork of broken clay pots, rusted cans, and a single muddy sandal. I knelt, examining the sole. Child's design, floral imprint. The same brand Carla wore in her old photo. I lifted it gingerly, sanitized with gloves. The darkness behind me deepened as my light pierced the gloom. Then I heard it. Tapping, breadcrumb, breadcrumb, finger on bone, coming from beneath the wire fencing. A faint rattle. I knelt, heart pounding, pressed my ear to the collapsed wall. Beneath, I heard a soft, uneven breathing. My hand shook as I radioed, voice barely audible over the thump of my pulse. "Dispatch, the barn cellar, possible survivor. Send EMS and a breach team, repeat, medical emergency." My mind flickered. Sylvia? Carla? Someone else? I grabbed a crowbar from my belt and pried at the loose boards. The wood cracked, revealing a shallow cavity where something, or someone, pressed against the other side. I wedged the crowbar further, then shifted on my knees, pried the final planks free. A shaft of flashlight beam cut through the void. A voice, hoarse and terrified, stammered, "Help! Please, get me out!" I slid inside on my stomach, face inches from sweat-streaked stone. The breathing came from a young woman, pale-skinned, dirt-smudged, eyes wide with relief. She clutched her ankles, legs drawn up. I fit my shoulder through the gap and extended my light. The woman looked at me like the sun had risen inside a tomb. Her voice shook. I thought I was alone. "Easy now," I whispered. "I'm Deputy Carter. You're safe." I brushed hair from her face, long, dark, tangled with clay. She sniffed, tears brimming. "They left me. They took my clothes, my phone, names. They said my name wrong." She shook her head. "I'm Marisol Garcia." My heart clenched. Another missing person with MG initials. Another token waiting above the well. An earring with MG engraved had gone uncollected because I never plumbed that drain far enough. I anchored my belt to a wooden beam and looped a rope around her torso as instructed by training. Secure the victim before extraction. She shivered. I pressed my jacket over her shoulders. The shaft of daylight through the wall's gap was thin but enough. I heaved, brought her through, sweat and blood mingling on my sleeves. Once her boots touched solid ground, she collapsed into my arms. I held her tight, feeling pulse flutter like a caged bird. Sirens wailed as EMTs arrived, and deputies formed a perimeter. I watched Marisol being tended with warming blankets and oxygen. I averted my gaze, my mind racing. 1 woman saved, 2 women missing, and countless names waiting to be carved into clay and metal. The barn's cellar held Marisol's body only moments ago, now an echo. The well held someone else. The farmhouse held someone else. The world was a network of traps and tokens, and I was running out of threads to follow. I lifted my head, rain starting again in fitful drops. I drew a breath, fighting nausea and exhaustion. I radioed, Carter to dispatch, Marisol Garcia rescued. 3 victims identified, Monroe, Mitchell, Garcia. Possible pattern of multiple M surnames. Recommend statewide alert on any missing persons with M initials. Immediate review of cold cases. The deputies exchanged grim looks as they bagged evidence. The baptism of a new investigator thrust into a case too deep, too orchestrated. I retrieved the child's sandal from my pocket, tracing the floral imprint. I felt its sole edges soften under my touch. Marisol's eyes hovered at the edge of my vision. Grateful but haunted, a mirror of my own. I realized then that this predator wanted me to save survivors, but also to bear witness to the horror. The fear of that narrow space, the ritual of tokens, the broken bodies calling for rescue. I slid the sandal into an evidence box, sealing it with tape. The rain turned the dirt to mud around me, each step a slow surrender to gravity. I climbed back into the cruiser, water dripping from my hair, and closed the door with a hollow thunk. I stared at the farmhouse as the wrecker hauled in the trailer. The forensic dive team setting up at the well, the barn lights glowing like beacons in a field of shame. My radio crackled. "Carter, you need to get off scene. Shift change in 30 minutes. I answered, voice flat. "Understood. But I'll stay. I want to oversee everything until it's done." I felt eyes on me, Marisol's, dispirited but trusting. I vowed then I would see this through. I would map each token, trace each footprint, interview each witness, and confront the architect of this terror. The well would surrender its secrets. The barn would empty its horrors. The farmhouse would yield its ghosts, and I would finish it, no matter how many names I added to the list, no matter how deep I sank into the well of human cruelty. Dawn broke pale and fragmented, a bruised sky. I crossed back through the battered front door and stood in the hall where I first knocked that night. The plaster had been dusted, but the gouges on the walls where someone had clawed for breath were still raw impressions. I shone my light up to the second-floor hall and, taking the stairs 2 at a time, headed to the children's room. The doll still lay face down. CSI had covered it with a numbered placard. I crouched beside it, traced the lace hem of its pinafore, and felt where someone else's fingerprints had pressed into the fabric. I bagged the doll piece and rose, every nerve alight. In the master bedroom, investigators had pulled back the rug, revealing a trapdoor beneath. I opened it. Steam and rancid air wafted up, and I flashed my light down into an unlit crawl space. The headlamps of the dive team splintered through the darkness below, revealing tangled roots and mud. I climbed down the ladder, 2 rungs at a time, until I stood in the muck, water reaching my ankles. The team had unearthed overturned crates, rusted cans, and a small wooden box carved with the same initials, CM. I knelt, opened the box, and found 2 photographs, aging paper curling at the edges. One of a teenage girl in a pale sundress, another of a woman standing in front of a carnival ride at Dallas State Fair. Both faces were unfamiliar, but their eyes held the same wide terror I'd seen in Sylvia and Carla and Marisol. Underneath, scrawled in shaky script, were 2 names, Christina Monroe and Carrie Mitchell, mother and daughter. The connection snapped in my mind like a loaded revolver. The farmhouse owner had been Sylvia and Christina's father and Carrie's grandfather, M for Monroe Mitchell. Family ties stitched around this hollow chain of sacrifice, the sick ritual passed down through generations. My radio crackled. CSI Martinez had run a DNA match on the clay residue in the cellar and found high concentrations of a rare soil fungus unique to one location, the abandoned barn foundation 2 miles south. The barn where the owner's body was washed away in the '98 flood. Now, suddenly, I knew where to look next. I passed the photographs to the dive team leader and scrambled back up the ladder, pulling myself into the warm light of the bedroom. My boots dripped slurry across the hardwood, and I ignored the shouts behind me as I rushed into the hallway, heart pounding like a jackhammer. I sprinted down the stairs and out the front door, where deputies were directing traffic away. My cruiser's engine idled 30 feet away. I didn't pause to pull my weapon. I didn't need it. The barn's location was burned into my GPS memory. I tore down the drive, tires spinning in the mud, and veered onto County Road 142. The sky was a bruised palette of purple and gold, the humidity lifting but not enough to clear the sense of blood in the air. I reached the barn ruins in under 5 minutes, skidded to a halt, and jumped out, flashlight and sidearm drawn. Under the cracked tin roof and shattered beams, the foundation was half buried in earth. At the center, a square shaft gaped like a wound in the ground. The soil around it was cracked and parched, but my light revealed wet streaks leading into the abyss below. I shone my beam down. The shaft dropped 20 feet before opening into a cavern of dripping rock walls. Shadows drifted at the edges. I felt that same pull, the locket's cold whisper, the echo of a phone's dial tone. I knelt and traced ancient initials carved into the stone. PM, Paul Monroe, Patriarch. SM, Sylvia's namesake. CM, Christina and Carla. MG, Marisol Garcia. A litany of victims, generations of women sacrificed and stored in earth and water. This was the root of the nightmare. The dive team arrived, ropes and harnesses in hand. The coroner followed, expression tight. I watched them shrink into the shaft's mouth, beam lights vanishing into the black. I shoved my hands deep into my pockets until my fingers closed on the final token. Marisol's sandal, now pinned in a plastic bag. I held it to my chest and closed my eyes, feeling her breathed prayer echo in my ears. They said my name wrong. A low rumble vibrated through the ground. Engine noise or distant thunder, I couldn't tell. I looked down the shaft again and imagined a woman's hand pushing off the rock wall to propel her down, kicking past clay-coated bones. I swallowed and drew one last breath before decision. I climbed the railing, secured my belt to a solid beam, and clipped into the harness. The dive leader shouted instructions. "You sure, Sergeant?" I nodded, heart thundering. I'm the one who started this. I began my descent into darkness. Every foot I lowered myself, the stone walls closed in, and the pitch of dripping water grew louder. My flashlight caught glints of something slick. Long dark hair, fragments of cloth, metallic shards, evidence of every life stolen here. I reached the bottom, landed in ankle-deep water, and a wave of sour air hit me. The chamber was larger than I expected, a natural cavity carved by groundwater centuries ago. But now it was a crypt. I signaled, and the dive leader floated in beside me. Behind us, the coroner followed. I shined my light across the floor. Skeletons lay in collapsed piles. Clothing remnants, jewelry tokens, each body marked with an evidence flag. Near the center, a fresh hole gaped. A grave dug by someone recently. I knelt beside it, shining my beam inside, a curled form wrapped in silt-stained sheets. I swallowed, eyes stinging as I recognized the outline of a petite frame. I waved up. They found her. Hands reached down, lifting something heavy. My light found a face, pale and peaceful. Lips parted as if mid-whisper. Sylvia's sister, Christina Monroe. I knelt as they laid her on a tarp, eyes fixed on the curve of her cheek. The coroner crouched, snapping photos. My hands trembled on my knees. Christina's earring still gleamed in her ear, initials PM faint in its silver curl. My radio crackled, backup overdue. A deputy's voice. "Sergeant, you need to come up. We got something on the farmhouse." I rose, wiping muck from my uniform, and signaled the dive team up. As they ascended, craning their necks for air, I sprinted back to the barn's edge, pausing only to grip the railing. My boots slid on mud as I broke into a run, mud spraying behind me, until I burst through the tree line and onto the farmhouse yard. The front door had been left ajar. Inside, a soft glow pulsed in the living room. I entered to find Sergeant Wilson and the homicide captain, flicking through photographs pinned across the dining table. Wilson looked up, face pale. "Carter, get a load of this." He flicked to a photo taken that morning. A grainy snapshot from an old security camera outside the farmhouse across the street. A camera I didn't know existed. In the photo, from 2:13 a.m., two silhouettes stood on the porch railing. One tall and broad-shouldered, the other short and lithe, wrapping an arm around the taller's waist. They stared directly at the camera, heads tilted, as if posing for a portrait. The timestamp glowed red beneath them. I stared at the figures. The taller man was unmistakable. Michael Teller, silhouetted in his red sky freight cap. But the smaller figure, slim, hair pulled back, stood with her head tilted toward him, posture almost casual. I zoomed the image. The short figure wore boots that matched the barefoot prints at the well. The pants were floral print, Marisol's design, and on her finger glinted a matching earring, small and silver, stamped with the initials E.G. My blood ran cold. E.G., another name, another token, a partner in this macabre dance. And there they stood on my property, mere feet from where I first knocked that night. Under the flashing dawn light, the farmhouse across the street, a house I'd never noticed, was the hidden lair of a second conspirator. I drew a shaky breath. "That's her," I said, pointing. "Marisol's partner." Wilson's jaw clenched. "She's alive too, with him." My mind raced. The whispers I'd heard in the wind, the voice urging me to finish. It hadn't been the predator calling. It had been the partner, luring me in, guiding me through the maze of graves and water, orchestrating each token to break me open, to draw me to this final reveal. They wanted me here, on their porch, to witness the trap closing. I bolted for the door, drawing my weapon. Wilson followed. I stepped out into the morning air, cold rain mingling with sweat on my face. Across the street, the farmhouse sat silent. Not a light flickered, no curtains stirred. But I could hear it. The faint hum of a generator, the bass of a television tuned to static. They knew I was coming. I raised my radio. "All units, perimeter around the farmhouse across the street. We've got two suspects, Teller and an unknown female accomplice. Initials E.G. Proceed with caution." My voice was tight, controlled. I swept my flashlight across the lawn, watching for movement. The rain began again in fat drops, splattering off the hood of my cruiser like a hail of bullets. Then, from behind me, I heard a soft laugh, feminine, breathy, the kind of sound you make when you know you've won. I whirled, sidearm leveled, but behind me was nothing. Only the empty doorway and the kitchen's gloom. I flicked my gaze back to the other farmhouse. A single window pane shot from the porch railing down to the floor with a tinkling crack. The silhouette of a man and woman slipped behind the curtains, melding into the shadows. I tightened my finger on the trigger, every fiber alert. A deputy's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Sergeant, do you copy?" "We're in position." I paused, thumb resting lightly on the safety. "Copy. Hold until I give the word." My heart thundered in my ears as I advanced, each step driving me toward the silent facade. The whispers caught again, carried on the wind. "Finish it." I exhaled, sight picture steady. My shadow stretched out before me onto the soaked grass, rifle dancing in my hands. I steadied my breath and prepared to breach. Then I heard it, soft, a single word, clear as a bell. "Officer?" I froze. The word echoed, but it hadn't come from me. It had come from them, from the walls, from the house, from the darkness. It wasn't a warning, it was a summons. I turned slowly, pistol trained on the horizon. The rain slackened, and in that brief moment of hush, I realized there was nowhere safe to stand. The line between hunter and hunted had collapsed. The stage was set for one final move. And despite all the evidence I'd gathered, despite every protocol and every promise, I had no idea how this would end. Only that it would end tonight.